Events were happening in the palace. Life wasn't working out the way she wanted it to. The girl glowed. She just wanted a new life, but why? At that moment, a boy ran up to her and put his arm around her waist. He shouted Aaliyah's name. The boy asked very much or not to divorce Young. The boy's name was Kaylee, from the Grand Duchy of Indigentia. And why was only the black-haired man attached to her? The girl repeated the boy's name, and the boy kept asking her not to leave. Tears flowed from the girl's eyes. Doesn't Aaliyah want to live with him? The boy sobbed. Or I certainly wanted to live with him, but there was one, but... And the girl looked carefully at the man who stood a little further away from her. Her marriage was a contract marriage, so her marriage to Cedric was coming to an end, and she would simply have to leave the duchy. Her husband was Cedric Kettizel of Indigentia. He was from the Grand Duchy of Indigentia. A man with black hair and blue eyes turned to his son. He called out to Caleb and asked him not to make Ellie's life harder. But the boy wouldn't listen to anything. Caleb wrapped his arms around Aaliyah. He didn't want her to leave him. He was very much used to her. Aaliyah was a very kind girl. That without Aaliyah, his brother would be a real fool. He's so sloppy he even cut his finger. Caleb cried and said that he was very afraid to sleep at night without Aaliyah. For as soon as he goes to his bed, he always thinks there is a monster hiding under the bed. That's why he was asking so much. He looked at the girl with his red eyes. He begged her not to divorce Young. But the spirit of the Kaliba was the strongest in this universe. More than 100 people were killed in the attack. And the monster under his bed is the great evil that will be his strength. He is destined to become a future wizard of gravity. Who will control the darkness? Cedric asked Caliba to stop whimpering. After all, Elia is in a predicament as it is. Not everything is as easy as it seems for a little boy. The young man with blue eyes turned to his colleague once more. At that moment, Elia stood up for the boy. She said that there was no need to be angry with the child because he was just a child and did not understand many things. At the moment, he just needed to be comforted. Cedric's hands trembled. He quickly grabbed the boy by the scruff of his neck and pulled him behind him. He quickly grabbed the boy by the scruff of the neck and pulled him with him. Or maybe I was stunned too. She hadn't expected a man to treat a boy this way. The girl's face was troubled. She asked the young man to listen. The man stopped but continued to hold the boy close to him. He looked at Ellie. Then he turned to the boy by name. He said that no matter how Calibi behaves, it won't change anything. There are many things that are beyond the mind of a child. And Caleb was embittered. He looked sternly at the man who held him by the scruff of the neck. He really wanted to hug Aaliyah. He became fierce and looked at the man who was holding him. The boy asked the man to wait and struck his hand with his fist. He called Hyung a fool. He said he was the biggest idiot in this world. If he just gives up Aaliyah like that, if he lets her go, how can he leave Aaliyah? How can he leave her? Hyun shouted at the boy. He said he didn't want to leave her. He never wanted her to leave. Aaliyah intervened in the conversation. She shouted for the boy and the man to stop talking. The girl was irritated beyond belief. Her hair was sticking out and her eyes were crazy. She asked why they were fighting. Because everything can be discussed and resolved peacefully. There is a way out of every situation. She didn't understand what had happened to her brothers. They share the same blood, but the difference in age was enormous. The girl did not understand what had happened between them. She had never seen her brothers like this before. Then one day, Aaliyah woke up in someone else's body. She didn't realize at first what had happened. What had happened to her? The girl stood in front of the mirror and opened and closed her eyes, but the reflection in the mirror did not change. A blonde-haired girl dressed in a blue sundress looked at her. She couldn't remember anything about the characters she'd been possessed by. She managed to get some information from a diary. Turns out it's an affair, and she's with a 23-year-old. That's all she got from the diary. From what little she remembered, she thought she was a minor character that the author didn't write much about. And that character is her. The girl ran up like well and quickly looked out into it. There was absolutely nothing around us. There was a solid forest, and the girl noticed that the weather was very nice now. It was sunny and warm outside. Seeing the nice weather outside the window, the girl wanted to go for a walk. She wanted to know what kind of world she had entered. She didn't know if it was a character she had been instilled with. The girl ran over to a tree and sat down under it. The only thing was for sure. It was very nice here. Clean air, an abundance of different colors all around. Getting into another body was a chance for her, so Aaliyah decided to explore the forest without thinking. Like other women's novels, this is an original story, so it will be very interesting. And the girl walked briskly down the path. It was even better, as if she were exploring a desert where there was nothing. But suddenly she saw a bunny behind a tree. The girl reached out to it and wanted to touch it. She wanted to make friends with the bunny, but in a second, the bunny turned away and hopped away. The forest was very big and beautiful, and the girl felt happy to me. She was happy like a little child, pulled her hands towards the sun. It was delightful. Suddenly, the girl was alerted by something. She heard a noise. The girl quickly turned around and looked in the direction where the noise was coming from. She was very surprised that there were also animals running around. At the same time, a boy of about 5 years old ran past her. Behind him ran a huge wolf. The wolf was chasing the boy, and the boy ran as fast as he could to get away from him. At this, the boy was screaming very hard. He knew he was about to catch up with him. The wolf's mouth was open, drool pouring from it. The girl saw that the boy was in danger. She rushed to his aid. She called out to him and asked him to run to her. The boy looked at the girl warily, but she assured him it was all right. And once more she shouted to him to run. She was running towards him as fast as she could. The boy turned round and stared in surprise at the girl approaching him. He realized that this was his chance for salvation. He quickly ran towards her, and the girl ran with her hands out towards him. The girl was running, and in her head she wondered if she would make it. But now was not the time to ask herself that question, whether or not she could do it. She just had to act. Her main goal now was to protect the child, and she, the boy standing behind her, bravely stood up to the wolf. The girl didn't know if it would work. This was a fictional world, but it would work. And the best way to avoid it. The girl tried to protect herself with her hand. The wolf had already jumped and was ready to claw at her arm. But at that moment something happened. The wolf was in slow motion. The girl herself was surprised that she got it just right. She swiftly kicked him in the jaw. The girl is excellent at martial arts. That's why she lightningly threw the animal away. At this point, the girl looked very enthusiastic. She was almost unlike herself. When she stopped, you realized that the wolf was lying on the ground, not moving. She was very surprised with herself. Did it really work the first time? Was she really that strong? The boy approached the girl from behind and asked if it was his. The girl said that, yes, and everything is fine now. The boy is safe. The girl laughed and said it was very scary. After that, she looked at the boy in surprise. It was a great relief. The boy thanked the girl for saving his life. The boy said he couldn't do it now, but in the future he would definitely repay her. At that time, the girl put her hand on the boy's shoulder. She put her other hand on his other shoulder and looked carefully into his eyes. The boy looked questioningly at the girl, and the girl looked silently into his eyes. She wondered. It was impossible, wasn't it? She knew it couldn't be. She remembered a boy very much like this one, and she called out Yuni's name. Could it really be him? Now Yuni was right in front of her. She looked into his eyes and couldn't believe it. How could this happen? It's the real Yuni. Yuni is really right in front of her. But the boy only looked at the girl with surprised eyes. Who is Yuni? That's not his name at all. His name is not Yuni. The boy said he was a Grand Duke from the imperial family of the Apritzen, Caleb Indigentia. After these words, the girl was speechless. She looked at the boy with eyes full of surprise. Her eyes were dilated. A puzzle began to piece together in her head. This child is the product of her upbringing. This is the dark side of the novel she read. She had one single family, Yuni. Yuni suffered from a rare disease, so he had to stay in hospital all the time. Despite his young age, he always bore the treatment courageously. As a member of the national taekwondo team, he was promised a gold medal. Yuni said he was looking forward to it, and smiled mischievously as usual. While preparations for the Olympiad were underway, time passed quickly. And the day he won the gold medal, the coach was stunned. She couldn't believe the boy had made it. She had always believed in him. Now they don't have to worry about money. Now they can go to the best hospital. They will live happily ever after with their beloved little brother. His sister went into shock. After all, the boy had asked not to tell his sister until after the match. That was Yuni's will. When she lost Yuni, she spent her time in all kinds of media. She became addicted to the internet because she wanted to escape from reality. Then one day she saw an advert by chance. The advert was for a web novel, and the girl decided that this time she would definitely not fall asleep. When the photorealistic cover came out, she just couldn't take her eyes off it. Among the people on the cover was the face of darkness. It was almost a perfect replica of her brother Yuni. The girl was immediately interested in Roman because of the fact that this young man was very much like her brother. She counted her all night long. And now the boy Caleb, the face of darkness who looked like her brother, was now right in front of her. The boy also thought she had mistaken him for some Yuni and saved him. He apologized if he had upset her by saying he wasn't a Yuni. Hearing the boy's voice, the girl was once again dumbfounded. He even had the same voice as Yuni. He said he would reward her anyway. He is a benefactor, so the girl can wish for anything she wants for saving him. If he wasn't currently injured, he would have done it with magic. The girl was surprised. The young man had just said that he was hurt. At that moment, the girl turned her attention to the boy's arm. Blood was dripping from his hand. The girl was shocked. The boy asked her not to make so much noise. It was a minor wound, but the girl could not calm down. She waved her arms quickly and asked how could the wound be insignificant. He's bleeding from his hand. The girl quickly took the boy's hand in her own and looked at the wound. 3 fingers had been cut, and there were other red spots on the hand as well. The girl didn't understand what it was, or his palms some red spots. In fact, she'd say it was a scar from a previous injury. The girl asked the boy to follow her. After all, she couldn't treat the wound properly here. So the girl asked the boy to come with her, for not far away is the hut where she lives. At that moment, the girl with teeth tore a piece of cloth from her sleeve. The boy was surprised that they would go to her, but the girl realized that she couldn't just leave the wound open. She quickly bandaged his wound with a piece of cloth from her shirt. The boy looked at his hand and thanked her for it. But the girl said there was nothing to thank her for, and let that wolf lie there. At that moment, the girl turned her attention to the boy's leg. She thought his leg was twisted. The boy said it looked like he had sprained it while running. The leg was a little twisted and hunched, but it was hard for the boy to walk, and he's probably in a lot of pain, but the boy said he wasn't in any pain at all. The girl saw that the boy was limping, but at the same time, he says he has no pain. He told her the same thing about his arm. The girl asked him to tell her if it hurt. The boy looked at the ground confused. At that moment, the girl realized. She felt Calibai's spirit suddenly drop, as if she had just scolded him. But she was just worried about him, wasn't she? The boy continued to stand silent. It was all right. Suddenly, the girl remembered something from the novel she had read. Kolob was clearly in short supply. For some reason, the vassal didn't like him. Caliber had always been held to strict standards. He should always be mature, perfect, and not disappoint those around him. The girl wondered why the vassals hated Khalib. She didn't know why, but it had never been addressed in the original work. Because of such standards, even though he's from a ducal family, he's probably so discouraged. Because vassals are so evil, and he's just a child. Naz remembered her brother telling her. When he was in hospital, he always told his sister not to worry. He really wasn't in any pain at all, and the girl clenched her fists. She quickly turned away from the boy. She squatted down, held out her arms to him, and asked him to stand on her hands. Khalib didn't understand why she was doing this. The girl said since his legs hurt, she would carry him on her back. But the boy didn't want it. You said he didn't need to be carried. He's not that badly hurt. He can walk on his own. Her brother's words echoed in her head again. He can walk on his own. It doesn't hurt him to walk on his own. The girl didn't understand why did Yuni continue to seem reserved. There's a completely different boy standing in front of her now. But he looks exactly like her brother. The same eyes, the same words, and even the same voice. The girl said it's okay. She just wants to help. And she's willing to carry him on her back. He tried to object, but the girl told him to calm down. He sat on her back and put his arm around her shoulders. The girl said what's wrong with just riding on his back? She's strong, so she'll be fine. But the girl realized that Potassium was not Yunyi. Well, he looked so much like her brother. Here it was, and it was done. The girl quickly rewound the boy's 3 mangled fingers, and a thought went round and round in the boy's head. If he had a wand, he would heal his hand with magic right away. Khalib scrutinized his hand, and the girl holding the first aid kit smiled sweetly. At that moment, the girl handed the boy a cup of cocoa. She said that she had used the last remnants of cocoa powder. The girl really hoped it would taste good. While she put a mug of plain water in for herself. She didn't have any more powder to make cocoa for herself. But at this moment, she was not at all worried about herself. Thanked her for her concern. But the girl didn't want or need the thanks. The girl watched the boy carefully, and he was drinking cocoa. A small child. In the future, the world will sink. Why fear? The girl wondered. Why did she get involved with the Caliban? The most important character. She's secondary at best. The girl said she was sorry, but she hoped he would get better soon. They sat at the table opposite each other. The girl did not stop looking at the young boy. The boy drank cocoa very greedily. At this point, she jumped up from her seat. She thought he was hungry. Why didn't he tell her that? The boy said he wasn't hungry at all. The girl asked him not to lie. She asked him when was the last time he had eaten. Khalib thought for a moment. After all, he had been wandering through the forest since dawn today. Nana was surprised. Could it be that he had been roaming the forest since dawn and hadn't eaten anything all day? After all, it was already 5 o'clock in the evening, so this child has been starving all day. And now to make him something to eat. Khalib said he doesn't eat dinner at all, and he doesn't need to cook anything now. Nana was surprised. Why this little boy doesn't eat dinner? Khalib said that if he gained weight, he would look bad at public events. His etiquette teacher told him not to eat, so for the past month he has been skipping dinner. The girl was dumbfounded. How can an etiquette teacher say skip dinner? How could a small child gain a significant amount of weight? It was simply impossible. How can you force a boy to diet while he's still growing up? Is he starving a Caliban who is only 6 or 7 years old? Now the girl understood the reason why he seemed very light. When she took him in her arms, and the girl asked him to wait for a while. The girl quickly clenched the potato in her hands. That manners teacher is crazy. The girl promised to feed him all sorts of goodies and send him on his way. She had already picked up some vegetables and a sharp knife. The girl cooked a bunch of all kinds of dishes, but all the dishes were potatoes. The only ingredient she has at home is potatoes. The girl was very disappointed and hurt, but it can't be helped. Potato dishes are also very tasty. Khalib was surprised. How she managed to prepare so many dishes so quickly. It didn't look like the girl was using magic at this point. The girl said she was just used to it because she lived here alone, and she asked the boy to taste the dish quickly. He was still thinking. The girl couldn't understand how she could tell such a child to lose weight. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. The girl asked not to listen to her teacher. And it's okay to eat dinner. And what's the point of having an etiquette teacher? The boy picked up a spoon and scooped up some soup. He quickly sent it into his mouth. Khalib said the soup was a little overpeppered, but still tasty. The girl suggested we try Kaliba crisps. When it rains, everyone asks for them. The girl quickly poked a chip on her fork and handed it to the boy. Khalib was stunned. He said he would eat it himself. The boy sat there, hesitating to try it. So he had a laugh and tried crisps. The girl watched the boy's reaction carefully, whether he liked the dish or not. The flavor was amazing. He will remember it when it rains. The boy was so keen that he started eating very quickly. The girl asked him to take his time. If there wasn't enough, she would make more. We ran out of other ingredients, so all the dishes were potatoes. And tomorrow she was ready to go out and buy other ingredients. Caleb slept in his bed on a white sheet. He was dreaming different dreams. The sun had already risen high and flooded the room with its light. It was Kaliba who woke him, and he opened his eyes. The boy realized he'd overslept. If the timetable had moved. He looked around the room and realized he wasn't at home. It was Aaliyah's house. And he remembered how the girl had rescued him, then treated his wounds and fed him a delicious dinner. He was so tired that he apparently passed out quickly and fell asleep. Even if it's not a duchy, he still shouldn't sleep that long. At least his tired body had a proper rest. And what was much more interesting was the fact that the boy couldn't believe he'd fallen asleep. From then on, he never slept well at night. He always had nightmares. It's like someone is attacking him, hits him with a sword. The boy felt all that terror. Suddenly, someone asked if he was awake. It was Ellie. Her hair was tied up in a high bun. The girl asked if Calibi had slept well. She had a large sack behind her back. The girl said the boy was sleeping so soundly that she made the decision not to wake him. Khalib was a little surprised. The boy tried to get out of bed and asked the girl where she was. For the boy saw that she had a large bag hanging behind her back. Elia said that she had gone to get food. At that moment, the girl laughed. She said that she would make him a meat stew for lunch today. The boy was still sleepy. He lost his eyes with his hands. Khalib thought for a moment. Who was Aaliyah? This girl who could kill a wolf with a single blow. The one who could heal wounds. She looked simple and dazzling at the same time. Doesn't look like an ordinary person at all. That said, she is a very good cook. The boy walked from his shirt and only silently watched the girl. And a lot of thoughts were spinning in his head. The girl stood in front of the cooker ready to cook dinner. And Callie continued to walk around looking at her in surprise. Elia didn't realize what had happened. Suddenly, Callie lowered his eyes to the floor. He really wanted to say that he was interested in getting to know Ilya better, but she couldn't say anything about herself. This is the moment Callie asked that from tomorrow onwards, Ilya should wake me up if he wakes up late. The young man wanted to talk about something else. Ilya asked why he would need to be woken up early starting tomorrow. Khalib said that he just couldn't stay up late. Ilya crossed her arms over her chest and thought for a moment. She didn't understand why you couldn't sleep as much as the boy's body wanted, and Calibi didn't know how to behave the way he wanted. There were always certain rules for him. Ilya said they don't have a schedule, and she sees nothing wrong with a child sleeping at home. Khalib said he's not a child, he's a Grand Duke. Leah pointed out that he's not in the Grand Duchy right now, and until he returns to the Grand Duchy. Well, he's a Caliban, not a Grand Duke, and he can behave like a little boy. The boy was surprised. Would he really just be for now? Leah said that was right and stroked the young man's head with her hand. The girl said that here he can sleep as long as he wants. He can eat something tasty, and if he wants to play, he can play as much as he wants. Khalib was very surprised. He didn't quite understand how one could live like this without rules. He wasn't used to it. Elia is so strong, killed a wolf with a kick of her foot, plays heels, and is a great cook. That said, she's a very nice girl. At that moment, she took her hand away from the boy's head. She realized that even unconsciously she had just stroked his head. Leah offered the boy something to eat. She asked him to make himself comfortable at the table. The boy was speechless. Elia's words were rolling around in his head, just caliber. It was very strange for him to realize. Since his birth, his teachers had taught him that he was a Grand Duke. He should realize that he should always behave like an adult. They kept telling him that he was the Grand Duke, and he was no longer a child. He didn't like it either. He has to behave like an adult, and all for the good of the Great One. The boy clenched his fists. He knew he shouldn't do what Aaliyah said. He knew all this perfectly well, but why those words made him feel so happy. The boy even smiled at that moment. Aaliyah pulled him out of his thoughts. She told Calibu he was out of cocoa, and made him some chamomile. Caleb didn't mind at all. On the contrary, he really liked the chamomile. Aaliyah sat opposite and watched the boy with a happy look. She asked him how he liked the food today, whether he liked it or not. He answered that it was very good, and he liked the way she cooked. Or I felt happy. She closed her eyes and began to smile. Khalib looked at the girl in surprise. He was not used to seeing such happy people. After all, in the Great Duchy, everyone was evil, harsh, and strict. Khalib told Aaliyah that she was amazing. The girl was surprised to hear such words from the boy. It's probably because he looks a lot like her dead brother Yuni, who she lost long ago. It was as if she felt like her brother was with her again, as if he had known her for years. And he said he wanted to know more about Aaliyah, and he also wanted the girl to know more information about him. The girl was surprised. The boy really reasoned and talked like an adult. She realized that the Kalen wanted to get to know her better. The boy was calm and composed at this time. He was finishing his tea. But what to do? As long as that boy is here, she tries her best, but you can't cross the line. That's what she thought. To tell her. The boy was surprised. He looked at the girl with wide-open eyes, or she couldn't say no to him. There's nothing wrong with it. She's just ready to hear the story about him. After that, they won't talk about it anymore. The most important thing now is for Aaliyah to be strong. Khalib began his story. He stammered a little, his voice shaking, said he had the boy's castle for a while. After gathering his thoughts a little, he began to tell his story again. He said he had an older brother. A little stammering, he repeated again that he had an older brother. Aaliyah listened to Khalib very carefully. She thought he was going to tell her brother's story. And the girl remembered the original book. There was no way she would sleep this time. A title that anyone who read it would not be able to forget. And the boy began his story of the marriage of the Stirka Kedisel of the Ingencia. At the age of 10, he was adopted by the family of Ingencia. He perfected the magic of gravity at the age of 13. He even revived weather magic, which was said to have disappeared 120 years ago. It was very difficult for an 18-year-old teenager. One time he even broke the Emperor's staff. He was the strongest of this building world. After a brief introduction, no other information was available, or I wondered. Khalib said his older brother came into the family as an adopted son. Even though they're not related by blood, he really likes his brother. He respects him. But last year, and the boy lowered his gaze. He said his brother was cursed. These words really surprised Aaliyah. How could such a thing be possible? Who could have done this? The boy said that as he had heard, only the caster himself could break this curse, but that caster was still missing. It was noticeable that the boy was very upset. It all made sense to Aaliyah, and she immediately remembered the fairy's curse. She knew that fairy curse. Maybe that's what made Kali turn into the face of darkness. In the original novel, the patroness of the Marinas family and Prince Renaud of the Empire as the protagonist. This novel was going on. That one day a fairy appears to Renaud. She promises to plunge him into eternal sleep. With one sweep of her hand, the fairy tries to put a curse on him always. At that moment, Daphne appears in front of Renaud. To protect him from the spell, she reflects the curse with magic. It is at this moment that they look into each other's eyes. The boy, too, without averting his gaze, looks at the girl who is trying to save him, and so his hand reaches for hers. They lock their hands together tightly. It's also the moment they fall in love with each other. Daphne ends up saving Renaud under a curse. Ever since Cedric was cursed, it's not that there's no way to stop the curse. There is one way out, the Sanctuary of Knowledge. All the knowledge of the world is in the Imperial Palace of Ifricenta. There are 3 pillars of the Imperial family. The first pillar is the Maishalat of the body. The second pillar is Marinist water. Third stop Energens gravity. This is a place where only authorized persons can enter. If she remembers correctly, to continue the bloodline or become the head of the family, only those who had sworn allegiance to the family could enter. The fastest way for his brother to enter the Sanctuary of Knowledge is to become a Great Duke. But his brother refuses to inherit the throne and wants Caliban to be the Grand Duke. His brother says he shouldn't worry. Khalib was very upset that he wouldn't be able to break the curse, and so he didn't know what to do. It takes great effort to become a Great Duke. The boy was ready to do everything possible to get to the Sanctuary of Knowledge. This was all he would do for his beloved brother. The thought flashed through Aaliyah's mind that he shouldn't do that, for on the day that Caliban becomes Grand Duke, Cedric's condition would rapidly deteriorate. Khalib was very upset about it. But Calibu might be able to get to the Sanctuary of Knowledge very quickly, and then he'll dig through all the information he can find. But he won't find the slightest clue about the fairy, let alone how to break the curse. But one day, he is informed that the cursed fairy has been captured alive by the Imperial Court. Calypso will run to the dungeon where the fairy is, but when he comes running, he'll be very surprised. For at that very moment when he runs to the dungeon, the only person who can break Cedric's curse will be dead. When Caliban learns of this, he will think there is a conspiracy within the Imperial family, and he will completely stop trusting the Imperial family and deeply hate it. After that, for the sake of his favorite brother, he will want to destroy the Imperial family, will turn to forbidden black magic and make a contract with the Great Devil. That's where Caliban ended his story. Ilia knew that if it came to that, there was no stopping it. The future cannot be changed. Ilia closed her eyes. Klib is the main character in the book, a child who is completely different from him. He's not Yuni. But still, Ilia stood up and leaned his hands on the table. For now the Kalib is in this hut. Ilia quickly approached the boy. She moved even closer to him and hugged him. She told him he would succeed. She asked him to become a great duke and save his brother. Ilia said that if there was anything she could do, she'd help in any way she could. The boy said okay and hugged Aaliyah too. They decided that everything would be okay. At night, Aaliyah protected Khalib's sleep. She slept beside him and always held him when he was afraid. She taught him how to cook his food. 1 week flew by so quickly. They walked through the woods and talked a lot. At the first sight of the boy, she realized that he was not the same as before. The boy wove Aaliyah a wreath and gave it to a girl. There have been many changes in the boy. He became kinder and happier. When he placed the wreath on Aaliyah's head, he was overflowing with happiness. He really liked the way she looked in the wreath. The girl kept telling him to be careful not to fall. All the stiffness disappeared from the boy and he got up to smile more often. He was catching rabbits in the forest and was really happy. He expresses his emotions well now. That was right. This is exactly what a little kid should look like. He was very cute to watch from the outside. The boy met a bunny while walking and he was very frightened. Well, in the boy's arms, the little bunny was warm and happy too. Aaliyah was pleased. She smiled. Because once upon a time she wanted to touch that little bunny too. But she didn't succeed. He just turned round and ran away. And now he sits so meekly in the boy's arms and even lets her pet him. Well, as soon as Aaliyah wanted to touch him, how he broke free from the boy's grasp and ran away. It was strange to the girl why the bunny ran away as soon as he saw her. He probably didn't want to go into the hut with them. Aaliyah came up so suddenly that he must have been frightened. The girl suggested that her colleague go back to the hut and have a snack. The boy didn't mind at all. At that moment, the boy reached into his hand for Aaliyah. He wanted to walk hand in hand with her to the cabin. Leah was very happy. She realized that Calibi was starting to trust her. It's only been 1 week. The wounds have begun to heal. In a few days, Caleb would have to return to the Grand Duchy. I couldn't believe it had been a whole week already. Come to think of it, it was kind of weird. So much time had passed, but somehow Cedric wasn't looking for his brother at all. Now summer has replaced autumn and winter has arrived. Only it happened in an instant. It's winter outside the window. Cedric looked out the window and kept waiting. Cedric was very good looking. He had black hair and blue eyes, asking where the Caliber was, but I couldn't find him anywhere. The events took place in the Grand Duchy. A warning letter arrived from the imperial family. An aide entered the office. She asked to stop using weather magic, but Cedric didn't seem to hear her. He was looking through her into the distance. He was heir to the Duchy of Ingagentia. The girl said the castle gates are frozen, can't get out. His name was Edwin Polinoy, and he was the chief counselor of the Duchy of Ingagentia. The counselor said that if this continued, not only the castle but also the farmland would suffer from the cold. Cedric's eyes burned with a blue light. He said he was in control. The aide was very happy if all this was really true. Cedric said he had to clarify something. The young man said that if he wanted to stop the blizzard, the deputy would have to find his brother. It's been a week. The boy is nowhere to be found. Doesn't that seem strange? There's no clue. They have no idea whether he's dead or alive. Don't you just care about the weather? The aide said he had nothing more to say. Once again, everyone. He asked to be brought to either as soon as possible. He doesn't care, even if his vassals freeze to death while he searches for them. Edwin understood everything. He was ready to carry out the order. Cedric stayed in his office with his head down. He was very worried about his brother. Even though the prince is missing, they continue to complain about the cold. What was killing Cedric was that he didn't know where Caliban was, what he was doing right now, whether he was alive or dead. These thoughts crowded into Cedric's head. Drawn guilds with skilled professionals, the sub-guilds used by the Empress. But there was absolutely no trace of any. Is there really only one left, the Dark Guild? Cedric kept mentally naming Caliba. He was very worried about his brother. At this time, the hut where Aaliyah lived was warm and happy. The girl said that when the Caliber finished washing, he should get in there. She was ready for him to change the bandage before bedtime. The morale was almost healed, but it still needed some time to take care of them. Khalib said it's fine. He changed it recently. Aaliyah said it needs to be changed more often. Otherwise, it'll get worse. Or I said it was done. She wrapped the boy's wounds with a new band-aid. The wounds were healing well and without problems. Khalib looked at his hand carefully. Aaliyah said she thought he would be fully healthy in a few days. The girl looked into Khalib's eyes once more. She kind of wanted to hear confirmation that indeed he was all right. But you couldn't tell from the boy's appearance that he was happy about it. He continued to be somehow sad. Aaliyah was happy, and Khalib was sad. Aaliyah didn't say that she needed to recover faster and go back to the duchy. She was just very happy that early heals quickly, and she didn't feel like saying goodbye to Caleb at all. Aaliyah told Calibu that it was past her bedtime. At that moment, Callie turned to Aaliyah. He had something to say to her, but apparently he didn't dare. After a bit of thought, he said it was nothing important, and I preferred not to say anything. But Aaliyah could see that something was bothering him. The girl wished Caleb sweet dreams. She also wished Aaliyah sweet dreams. The boy raised his hand and covered Aaliyah's hand with his own. He felt safe next to the girl. When his arm heals, he'll be able to use magic, and he'll have to go back to the duchy. That's the way it has to be. He can't stay with Aaliyah forever. And he clenched his hand on the pillow. He really didn't want to leave Aaliyah, despite such a short time in this hut. He had grown very used to the girl. Caleb asked Cedric, What he's doing. If he becomes an archduke, who will prove his loyalty and be able to enter the Temple of Knowledge. He was dumbfounded that his brother would just give up the title like that. But Cedric always told Caleb that he would not become archduke. It is Caliban who must lead the indigenate family. But it's going to take a long time for Caliber to become archduke, and the curse needs to be broken now. Cedric said there was no need to worry. There is another way of removal. Caleb doesn't need to worry about the curse or the Temple of Knowledge. His brother told him to do only what he wanted to do. He overheard the maids talking once. He didn't know his brother Cedric was getting married. He was very surprised to hear the news. The maid of the other said she was too loud. She just said he could get married. It does not mean he is already doing it. The other didn't understand why he should get married. But there were no leads. After all, the only way out was the Temple of Knowledge. Cedric has refused to inherit the title of Archduke. Now the only way to prove the family's loyalty is through marriage. But finding a spouse won't be so easy. There were a lot of rumors going around. Many have said that the curse is contagious. Caleb was upset. It couldn't be true. Who would spread such ridiculous rumors? No one knew if it was true, but now everyone was talking about it. He felt the tension too. Would there be a woman who would want to marry Cedric? His brother most likely knows about the rumors spreading too. Why didn't he say anything to him? Cedric cares for him. Or maybe he just doesn't trust him. The boy knew nothing. It'd be nice if he was telling the truth. I mean, Caleb's an adult. He understands everything and he's no different. At that moment he was lying next to Elia. Well, for some reason I was having insomnia. Who as Elia had taught him, his brother too. And Calebus was immersed in sleep. He dreamed that Elia was dancing with his brother. They're very happy. It's their wedding day. At this time, Caleb called out to Elias. Quickly he opened his eyes. A thought occurred to him. And if Elia had become Cedric's wife, she could help his brother. If she was the one he married, then they'd have a happy family. Cedric can prove his loyalty and enter the Temple of Knowledge. If he can find a way to break the curse, then he can divorce Elia. I wanted to tell him she was his savior. I can't all live together in a duchy. Then he won't feel lonely anymore. He looked us the kitchen where Elia cooked so skillfully. Rosto, on which he sits and eats. The sun was rising higher and higher above the horizon. Caleb was already awake. He lay still so as not to wake Elia. What had he been thinking all night? How can he be so selfish? That's why he's always alone. He can't cause any more trouble. Tears flowed from Caleb's eyes. When his arm is fully healed, he'll be back to become an archduke. And he will be. The next day came. Elia wondered, as always, what he wanted for lunch today. She wanted to make him something particularly tasty. Caleb hesitated for a moment. He stood silent. After a little thought, he said he didn't care. Elia could cook whatever she wanted. Calibre sounded some sort of somber mood. He stopped smiling, stopped being interested in anything. Elia realized at that moment that he had been in that state for a long time. The problem was that this mood was not due to fatigue. He woke up and was already in a bad mood. The boy was apathetic. Elia thought to herself that she must not give slack. There was nothing she could do. Elia turned to the Caliban. She said she was having baked soup for lunch. After all, it was these dishes that were the favorite of the Caliban. The girl suggested that he pick some lemons. Caleb agreed. He went outside to get lemons. He was sad and unhappy. His steps were uncertain. Leah thought his mood would certainly improve if he got some fresh air and took a little walk. They could walk together a little later. The door swung open and Callie stepped outside. At that moment, Elia saw a so-and-so man in a black cloak walk up to the boy. Or she was watching them closely. What does this man want with the boy? The man said he finally found him, and the man held out his hand to the boy. At that moment, Elia quickly threw the frying pan, and it hit the man right on the head. In preparation, held another frying pan in case it didn't disarm the enemy the first time. Elia asked Kaliba with all her might to go to her. The girl didn't catch what kind of man was standing near the boy. He looked very suspicious. Could he be trying to kidnap Caleb? What does he want with him? Suddenly, Caliban called this man his brother. The girl was dumbfounded. Was this really the caliber of a brother? She had thought it was the villain. Clip ran up to his brother and sat in front of him on his knees. He asked if he was okay. Caleb named the man she just hit with a frying pan with her brother. The man was lying on the ground unconscious. Elia threw the pans on the ground. Could this be the same Cedric she'd told her about? The boy sat in front of his brother and sobbed. Elia lowered her head. She felt sorry for Caleb and also sorry for his brother. Elia knew she had to check first. Well, her body reacted that way, there was nothing she could do about it. She was put on the bed. Caleb said the girl did it because she was scared. Caleb said his brother would understand when he explained it all to him. Brother is a strong man, so he'll definitely deal with these bumps. Ellie felt the caliber desperately protecting her. Ellie said that the first thing to do was to wet a towel and place it on the sick person's head. I didn't expect him to find him so quickly. It's only been a few weeks since the boy disappeared. Ellie could hear the annoyance in Caleb's voice, as if he was completely unwilling for his brother to find him. Caleb said he would bring water and a towel. Elia thanked him. Caleb said he would bring it right away. The man seemed to say something, but Elia couldn't make it out. She looked at the young man in surprise. At that moment he came to his senses. Or I felt insecure. She was the one who should have gone to get a towel and left Caleb here. Or it showed her that he was awake. Maybe he was just talking in his sleep. Aaliyah sat closer to the young man. She decided he needed to unbutton his collar. She quickly grabbed the collar of his shirt to undo it. But at that moment the young man's hand grasped her arm. The man opened his eyes and asked what she was going to do. He stopped her. The girl was surprised. She didn't want to do anything wrong. She just wanted to stretch his collar so he could breathe better. Their gazes met. Cedric had very beautiful blue eyes. It was impossible to look away from them. Aaliyah felt embarrassed. She tried to apologize but couldn't. The young man stood up. He held his head with one hand. He wondered if she had hit him like that. What was her purpose? Cedric asked for what purpose she had kidnapped Caleb. The girl was just shocked. He thought she'd kidnapped him, that she didn't just kidnap him. She'd created a barrier so he couldn't find the place. Said girl had completely lost her fear. Aaliyah quickly waved her hands. She said he had it all wrong. The girl turned round and ran away. She wanted to bring Caliber here immediately so that they could explain what had happened together. Aaliyah's eyes were dilated. At this point, Cedric asked if she was now trying to get away from him. The girl was surprised again. Somehow, Cedric managed to stop her. She couldn't go anywhere, most likely gravitational magic. Aaliyah explained that she wasn't trying to escape at all. Cedric stood looking at the girl in silence. A certain atmosphere had been created around him. Aaliyah realized he wasn't joking. Suddenly, a towel flew into Cedric's face. It was Caliban who came in. He asked what he was doing with Aaliyah. He asked Brother to quickly reverse the spell to apologize to her. Caleb told Cedric that this was his savior. Cedric didn't believe his words. The boy told his brother that this girl had saved him when he was running away from the wolf. If it wasn't for this girl, who was there at the time, he would have eaten him. At that moment, Aaliyah realized that she was now free. Magic no longer worked on her. And Caleb couldn't believe a brother could do that to his savior. Caleb was disappointed. The expression on Cedric's face barely changed, but he was clearly in shock. Caleb quickly ran up to Aaliyah and asked if everything extra was all right. He took her hand. Cedric asked so if he hadn't been kidnapped, and he could use magic. Why didn't he go back to the duchy himself? He was able to put up a barrier. Therefore, it would also be possible to teleport easily. Aaliyah was surprised. Did Caliban really use magic? When the girl checked his arm yesterday, Early was in the same place. His finger was damaged. Could he really use magic at that? Caleb clenched his fists. He did it because that I wanted to stay here with Aaliyah. Tears flowed from the boy's eyes. He wanted to be with her just a little longer. Aaliyah was shocked. Caleb asked him to apologize for deceiving him. If you hurt your arm, you can't use magic, but he had a wound and could do magic safely. If it was revealed, he had to go straight back. So he decided to hide it from Aaliyah. Caleb asked, is Aaliyah mad because he tricked her? And he apologized to her once more. Aaliyah looked at the boy in silence. She held out her hand to him. She said she had no reason to be angry with him. He didn't have to apologize to her. And she hugged the boy tightly. She began to wipe away the tears dripping from his eyes. At this point, Caleb was crying. But in the original story, he never cried. Aaliyah realized that he liked being around her. Yes, he liked spending time with her. Caleb asked if Aaliyah would be sad for him when they parted. The girl said it was natural, and they had a lot of fun together. The boy kept asking the obvious things, and at that moment Caliban asked whether Aaliyah wanted to go with him to the duchy. The boy said she could marry his brother. At that moment, Cedric was stunned. He hadn't expected to hear such a thing from his brother. Aaliyah laughed merrily. The boy was so tired he fell asleep. Aaliyah made herself and Cedric a cup of tea each. They sat down at the table. The girl said that so much had happened during that time. It was just kind of crazy. First, we have to give him something to eat, something to cook. This is no time to be talking like this. What was Aaliyah's surprise when the young man came out with a bare torso? He walked to the table as if nothing had happened and pushed back a chair. And the girl was just shocked. She almost knocked the teacups to the floor. She was dumbfounded and froze in place. He was very handsome. She realized his shirt was soaked. But why take it off? Did aristocrats always do that? The girl asked Cedric for a drink, though it wasn't much, but it was still, in my opinion, warming. The young man thanked the girl. Ellie looked into her blue eyes once more. She didn't understand why his body was so perfect. Sitting in front of the naked young man was nervous. She didn't know where to look. Memories surfaced in my mind of the guys who competed, and Cedric looked better than the guys who were preparing for the competition. Aaliyah needed to calm down now. Suddenly, Cedric clicked her name. The girl turned her head and looked at the young man. He drank the whole mug and asked to be excused. He bowed quickly, but the girl didn't understand why he was apologizing. She was the one who hit him with the frying pan, but she had done it to protect Caleb. It was true, but still, she needed to behave. Aaliyah asked Cedric to sit on a chair. She handed him a burgundy cloth so he could cover himself a little. The young man covered himself with a cloth and sat down in a chair. The girl remembered that Cedric had been given little attention in the original story. She had always been curious about him. The man had a cold look in his eyes, but Cedric seemed very nice. Khalib's words reappeared in Aaliyah's mind, that she could marry his brother. But if you think hard about it, why is Khalib suddenly talking about marriage? She could ask Cedric about it. It was probably because of the curse. Could it really be the curse of the fairy? And whether this curse was somehow related to marriage? That was right. Khalib believes the answer may lie in the Temple of Knowledge. You have to be the head of the family to get in, or hold a ceremony on which to take the Pledge of Allegiance. Aaliyah asked, unable to perform the ceremony right away. Only level-headed relatives can perform the ceremony. Even though he is the older brother, he has completely different blood. But if he is married, he has the right to perform the ceremony, and then one can enter the Temple of Knowledge. Must have thought of this way, and that's why he asked her to marry his brother. Even though she realized it was difficult. It seemed to Cedric that the Khalib really trusted Aaliyah. It was the first time his brother had seen Khalib like that. Aaliyah only sighed in surprise. If we talk about marriage, there are most likely a large number of girls who want to marry him. But there were absolutely no such girls. There were rumors that the curse was contagious. Well, if that's what happened in the original. Cedric said not to worry. After all, it was just a rumor that someone had spread on purpose. Yet he noticed that Aaliyah was concerned. The young man said that when Callie woke up, they would go straight back to the duchy. The girl was stunned. She remembered the words of Khalib, who had said he really wanted to stay with Elsa at least a little longer. The girl asked her to apologize. She asked why all three wanted to make either Ears a duke. Cedric looked at the girl carefully. Was she really that worried about him? For Aaliyah, that was certainly one of the reasons. She wanted to know what Cedric thought about it. She said that for some reason, Khalib was kidnapped right after he was born. They had been looking for Khaliba for 4 years. When they received information about the shelter, they went there immediately. Aaliyah was stunned. He'd been kidnapped. Khalib was the only one who came back. At that moment, Aaliyah remembered the Indigentia murder case. On the way from the orphanage, someone attacked them. Those in the carriage were killed except for Khalib. The boy just sat and watched the fire. It was a terrible tragedy. Cedric probably kept it from the boy on purpose. Since then, some vassals have hated Caliber. They spread rumors of his incident while Cedric was trying to find his legitimate son. And there was another reason. In this situation, Cedric cannot take away the right to inherit the title. Khalib just has to become an archduke to protect himself. To not rely on outside help, it's better to have your own power. Even if Cedric doesn't get into the Temple of Knowledge. It's all right. There are other ways. And at that moment, Ellie clutched her dress. Even if he doesn't know how to express his emotions, it's clear to her that Cedric really wants Calibi to survive. But Callie can't live the way Cedric wants her to live. She didn't want to hear it. Why she kept interfering? She can't help it if she listens to him. If Cedric marries her and enters the Temple of Knowledge, he still won't find a way to break the curse. There's only one way out. The fairy who put this curse. And it was as if it hit Cedric at that moment. He turned to the girl. She quickly jumped up and the chair fell behind her. Asked if she was all right. Why didn't she think of it before? She knows because she read about it in a novel. When Caliban became an ex-duke, the fairy kidnapped the main character. And she was captured by the imperial family. What if they find the fairy before the imperial family and break the curse of Cedric? The only thing she didn't know was how the fairy died. By the time they catch her, it'll be too late. They must get ahead of the imperial family. To do that, you have to figure out who the fairy is. Aaliyah had definitely seen her face and name at the end of the novel. If only she could remember it now. Cedric noticed that Aaliyah was thinking about something. He wondered if she had a problem. And at that moment, a brilliant idea came into the girl's head. She thought of another way to break Cedric's curse. The man was surprised. Is there really any other way? If they carried out the plan, Cedric wouldn't have to marry anyone, and they could change the course of history. The girl said there was another way. In her mind was the image of the fairy who had cursed Cedric. Aaliyah said this, and it was as if the fairy was ready to take off her hood. Cedric ran to Aaliyah and started calling her name, for the girl had crouched sharply to the floor at that moment. Cedric asked if she was all right. Why she sat down so suddenly. Cedric called her name. The girl's eyes were wide open, but it was as if she did not react to the words, nor to the touch. Aaliyah was thinking about something else. How could she have forgotten about it? All because it was mentioned only once in the novel. She made a surprised face. She remembered that the fairy had silver hair that turned pink. Her eyes were like rare gems. Could this mean that the fairy who put the curse on Cedric is her? She has the same hair and the same color eyes. The events took place in the cabin where Aaliyah lived. Khalib was very surprised. Could it really be true? Is Aaliyah really going to marry his brother? The girl laughed and said it was all true, and they would go to the duchy together. Caleb was just happy. He told his brother that it was just wonderful. The brother also confirmed Elijah's words. Cedric looked a little nervous, but it was understandable. You don't get married every day. And she remembered the moment when Aaliyah had alerted Cedric to another way. Looked the man straight in the eye and said that the other way was. and she suddenly offered to marry him herself. It was a sudden offer of marriage to a girl. Cedric was very surprised at that moment. He was more surprised than happy, but it was all very confusing, and it was necessary to clarify the situation as quickly as possible. She's the one, Elia, who created this problem. Only she can break Cedric's curse and resolve this matter. And now the long-awaited day has come. Cedric is getting married. He and Caleb are standing dressed in festive clothes. Aaliyah's not going to make it right now, because there's not a single memory of Aaliyah left. All she knew was her name and age. She didn't even have a basic knowledge of magic, and the girl thought there was nothing she could do. But there was good news. Always wore a black hood. That's why no one knows what a fairy looks like. Maybe that's why Caliban couldn't recognize her. She thought about winning, but now the story is very different. If Caleb finds out she's a fairy, immediately conclude that there can be no such thing. Could it really have been her? But Elia asked him to calm down. She asked him to wait. Caleb said she had enough time to break the curse. How dare she play with them? And he shouted at the fairy to die. Blood flew sideways. Or just for a second imagined what might have been. There was another problem. When Aaliyah was imprisoned, she died a mysterious death. What if she has a chronic illness? What if she was killed by one of her old enemies? It didn't matter if she ran or not, only death could await her. The only way to survive in this situation was to marry Cedric and keep track of how the curse would develop. The girl dropped her fist. At this point, Cedric shouts out that he is well. Everyone around him rejoices, including his brother and his new wife. And after that, she can take it off and leave herself in good health. She can go somewhere to enjoy a happy life alone. She'd be very happy if it worked out that way. In this situation, everyone stays happy, and she'll leave them forever. Now the only problem is, it all worked out the way she planned. Of course, at first, she decided not to get involved. But since she recognized that she was a fairy herself, she had to help. It doesn't matter that she's in the world of the novel. For her, these people have already become real. Cedric tried to explain to his brother that this marriage was not a normal marriage, and the boy should always know and remember that. Cedric wanted a contract marriage with Elia. The contract will be finished when they succeed in breaking the curse, and after that, Elia will return to her home. Caleb listened to the story. He didn't quite know what they meant. Caleb said, well, that was the way it was supposed to be. At that moment, Elia looked at Caleb carefully. She thought it would be sad to tell him about it right away. After all, he pretends everything's fine. However, it wasn't like that at all. Clip says Ali doesn't need to go back to that house. So divorcing his brother doesn't mean she has to leave the duchy. The boy said that when the curse was broken, she could live with Caleb. That she'd need a suitable status. That's why he's willing to become her official guardian, when she can live unhindered in the Duke's castle. Leah was dumbfounded by this answer. She thought something was different about Caleb. He was nothing like she'd first met him. Cedric told his brother that it would be very hard to do, but the boy didn't understand why. Cedric said it was one thing to persuade the vassals themselves. Had he thought of Elia's own desires? Caleb didn't understand. She said herself that she liked being around him. But at this point the young man was really thinking. Turns out she really never talked about her desires. At this point Cedric looked at the girl carefully. And the girl at this point didn't know what to say. She just couldn't find the word so quickly. Cedric looked at Elia with a questioning look. Cedric said that a change of scenery was needed first. The man said they needed to discuss the terms of their contract. On the bed, Caleb held out his hand to the girl. He motioned for her to come with him. Elia stared in surprise at the boy's outstretched hand. Though she felt sorry for Caleb, for he had grown up very early, she was relieved now. It wasn't that she hadn't thought about Caleb's proposal. She liked spending time with him, because he was a lot like her brother Yuni. If her memories come back to her, she can break Cedric's curse and prevent her death. Caleb won't be the villain who plunges the world into chaos. She'll stay by his side and be happy, but she's the one to blame for what happened. But it happened before she was in that body. But she's Aaliyah now, and there's no changing that. Now knowing everything, how can she tell Caleb she wants to stay with him? That would be cheating. Therefore, it is necessary to get rid of these feelings as soon as possible. For now, we need to focus on solving problems. And so they were already transported by magic to the duchy. They stood on the threshold of a huge castle. The girl and the man held the boy in both arms. Their life in the palace of the duchy had begun. Everyone didn't understand why the castle was so snowed in. Cedric confessed that something had happened. The events took place in a duchy. Everything in the duchy was beautiful. And here there were big gilded chandeliers, beautiful furniture, and lots of things to see. Aaliyah had never seen such beauty in her life. This place was just grand. She was thrilled when she came here. She didn't know anything about this place. Tea was always brought by the maid. I didn't have to do anything around the house. Aaliyah sometimes doubted if she could really pull it off. Is there really going to be a meeting with the vassals today? The girl had completely forgotten about it. She sat on the sofa and drank in her coffee. Cedric said yes because Calibus is safely back at the palace, and he needs to tell everyone of their marriage. There were no more plans today. Cedric said the girl could rest in her room, and if she waited here for a while, her maid would escort her to her room. Or so I was surprised. Would she really have a personal maid? At that time, an assistant came up to the Cedric. He turned to Mr. Cedric, someone said in his ear. At that time, Kaliba's brother stood up quickly and said that he had to go to an important meeting now. If Elijah needed anything, she could come to him at any time. This was the moment the Kalib asked him to wait. The boy wanted to attend the meeting too. Cedric was surprised. Did his brother really want to go with him? Elia was also very surprised. In the original, Caleb had never attended a meeting until Cedric had fallen into a dreamless sleep. Caleb insisted that his brother take him with him. He looked at his brother pleadingly. In the forest, he could remain just a Kalib, but here he couldn't stay a Kalib. Elia had saved him and cared for him, and she even had to accept his request. So this time he really wanted to go with his brother, and he can no longer avoid it. Wants to guarantee Elia's safety while she's here in Hertz. Elia called out to the boy. They met her eyes. Cedric was amazed. This woman had given the colleague so much confidence, and this in just a few days of being with her. The brother was fine with the boy going with him. Caleb waved the girl's hand cheerfully and said she'd be back soon. Elia was left alone in the living room. Her gaze was very surprised. Sunlight was falling through the window. The girl sat on the sofa in the living room and thought, it would be all right, wouldn't it? She would like to go along with them too. But that might be a little awkward. But since Cedric would be there, Caliban would be fine. At that moment, someone apologized to Elia. The girl raised her surprised eyes and stared. A girl in a brown dress and black shoes stood in front of her. The girl politely said hello to Mrs. Elia. The girl bowed and said her name was Olivia. She would serve her from this day forward. The maid smiled and said, nice to meet you. Elia was pleased to meet you too. Did she really have a personal maid? The girl asked Elia to speak freely to her. Elia laughed. She said it was fine, and she was more comfortable speaking that way. Elia asked Olivia if the meeting with the vassals had started. The girl said yes. The meeting had started recently. Elia had been worried about Kaliba the whole time. The boy sat on the throne next to his brother. He was taking part in the meeting. His appearance was calm. At that moment, one of the men slapped his hand on the table. He said what they were talking about. After all, this is the one and only Duchy of Indigentia in the Empire of Ypresent. The man who took part in the conversation was Reynold Babylon. He was the Marquis of Indigentia. The man was against it. After all, the woman doesn't even know where Cedric came from, and the man said that Cedric would be the head of the family. It was ridiculous. Cedric asked the man to be careful with his words. After all, the future Archduke is here, and how dare he call him the next head of the family? Talks also said that he loves this woman. The man was simply stunned. He was going to share the news at this meeting, not listen to the Marquis's opinion. Cedric planned to have the wedding ceremony as soon as possible. The man was no longer sitting still, he was standing in front of the table. When Caliban disappeared, Cedric used weather magic and froze the entire palace. Everyone didn't know what else he could do. If we're lucky, we'll get rid of this upstart. It was often the case that after the death of a wife, a man would remarry, so the Duke would not be harmed in any way. The man clenched into his fists. What the? Why all three had brought a bride to the duchy so suddenly? And if this continued, his plan would be ruined. Marquis Reynold Babylon was the only older brother of the previous Duchess Idisel Babylon Indigentia. He was always generous and caliber as an uncle. After the indication sewing family was murdered, he still failed to become the second man in power. But when Cedric was cursed, the Marquis began to make a new plan. First, he spread rumors to stop Cedric from getting married, that the curse was contagious. People were afraid of this and began to slowly distance themselves from the Cedric. Then the Marquesses copulated from the Caliban. Reynold was able to influence public opinion with the help of other vassals. This was possible because of his daughter Gerald, who became the Caliban's etiquette teacher. After that, Cedric will become a duke. When the curse intensifies, he'll have to marry Jerry, to avoid falling into eternal sleep. And then the Marquis of Arena would be the only man with absolute power. It's the sudden appearance of this girl that's ruined everything. Isn't she afraid the curse is contagious? If this keeps up, Cedric will go to the Temple of Knowledge and learn something about Caleb's past. And the man slammed his fist on the table again. That cannot be allowed to happen. It would be the end of him then. Cedric said that Elia doesn't know aristocratic culture, so she will be taking etiquette lessons with Caleb before the wedding. Marquis didn't expect to hear that. Did Cedric really think that Jerry had graduated from the academy with the best results to tutor this beardless maiden? It was simply impossible. At this time, Caliban asked, whom he called a motherless maiden. He turned to the Marquis of Babylon. The man was stunned. After all, the boy had never been like this before. What kind of pressure is that? Caleb asked the man to watch his tongue. He said this girl is the future Duchess of Indigentia. Is this woman so dear to him? The Marquis realized it, and smiled happily silently. It's right, he can't deal with it now, and those vassals sitting around can only take bribes. There is nothing they can do to help, so he needs to turn the problem into an opportunity. First, we have to kick her out of the duchy. Elia was simply speechless. Here she came already to her room and sat on the bed. It was very soft, and so the dawn came. Ilya spent the first night of her new room. Waking up, she quickly went to the mirror. Was it really possible to be so beautiful right after sleeping? She had eaten late the night before. Realizing where all the puffiness across her face was, the girl remembered. Yesterday she had received an expensive skincare treatment, and it was amazing. Her eyes were really like jewels. At that time there was a knock on the door. The maid told Mrs. Ilya that breakfast was ready. Ilya said she was already awake. At that moment, a maid came into the room and brought in a wheelbarrow of food. She begged her pardon and conquered nicely. On the table were all sorts of desserts and delicacies. Ilya had never seen such a sumptuous breakfast. She asked to be called when the mistress had finished her meal. She would have to go to Mr. Cedric's house afterwards. The maid asked if the girl had any clothing preferences. Ilya thought for a moment. The girl thought it would be all right if she dressed as she wanted to. She could handle it on her own and didn't need any help. Olivia was surprised that this is the lady speaking, going to meet her fiancé, and the girl asked for opportunities to dress her up. Olivia looked enthusiastic, and that was a good thing. There were a large number of books on Cedric's desk. The man sat at his desk and was quickly transcribing something. He had a lot of work to do. Suddenly he was informed that Mistress Ilya had come to see him. Cedric didn't take his eyes off the papers and told her to come in. Ilya was wearing burgundy shoes with green stones. Cedric apologized for calling her so early in the morning. He asked if the girl had slept well in her new place. He said all those words without even looking up. Ilya said everything was fine. The bed is big and comfortable. She had good dreams. Sidok said he was very glad to hear that. He asked the girl to wait a little while. He would sort out the papers. At that moment he raised his head. His gaze went straight to Ilya. His eyes became surprised. In front of him stood a simply beautiful woman. She was so gorgeous in her new outfit. Ilya Rada was smiling again. She realized that the man was very surprised. And the man looked at her and couldn't look away. The girl looked questioningly at the man. He said he would be done soon. He asked her to sit on the couch and wait a while. Ilya agreed, and he seemed to freeze when he saw her, whether he really did or if she was just imagining it. At that moment, someone coughed. Ilya turned her attention to the man who was standing nearby, and whom she hadn't noticed at first. The young man said he wanted to formally introduce himself. His name is Edwin Polinoiu, and he is Mr. Cedric's chief assistant. The young man was pleased to meet him. Ilya was also excited to meet Edwin. The aide said the reason she had been summoned. The girl looked questioningly at Edwin. At that moment, Cedric came up. He said he would tell her himself. Ilya saw that Edwin was blushing profusely. He looked like a tomato. At that moment, Cedric made a snap of his fingers, and the girl froze at what she saw. Everything around her glowed. Cedric put up a barrier so no one would overhear their conversation. Cedric asked the girl if she remembered anything from her past. Ilya was very surprised. She hadn't expected him to ask her that question. Cedric was talking about her memory loss at this point. Allie came to her senses. It was as if she was flying in the clouds. At that moment, she laughed out loud. She had said she remembered absolutely nothing. Now she remembered. She had told him that she had lost her memory. Cedric was a little disappointed. Ilya smiled cheerfully at that. Even if it looks suspicious, there is no other way out. She really doesn't remember her friends, her family. She doesn't remember anyone from her past at all. That it was better to hide it from the castle's inhabitants. So now Cedric's constant defense was to make sure no one could hear anything. Ilya thought. Thankfully, the Kaleb just believed her, but the girl had no idea what Cedric was thinking. He was always in thought and almost always silent. At that moment, he placed some document on the table. He said he'd come to the conclusion that it was necessary to harmonize their opinions. That way they could set a wedding date sooner. So yesterday, he drew up a contract. He really wanted the girl to read it. Or I was surprised he wrote it in one day. Also said that firstly, the contract is for 3 years. In case the curse is not lifted in that time, the contract will be extended for a certain period of time. That was a good idea. Personal expenses were set at 3 million gold per month. All Cedric asked was to feel free to use the money. But she would also need to write down her expenses in a notebook. Doesn't he want her to try to fill her pockets with gold? The young man said. If she is short of money, she just needs to turn to him, and they will quickly adjust the amount needed. At that moment, Ilya looked closely at the amount Cedric was offering her for her personal use. There were a lot of zeros here, and the girl quickly began to count them. It was a very impressive sum. She had never seen such money before, especially never spent so much money on herself. Ilya was stunned. She looked at the amount once more. Then she quickly shifted her gaze to Cedric. The amount was 3 BN. Is it really 3 BN allocated to her for her personal use? She was just stunned. The girl was so surprised that she cried out. Cedric sat and watched her reaction carefully. He didn't understand why the girl was reacting so violently. Cedric asked, wondering if that amount wouldn't be enough for her. But that's not what the girl meant at all. It's a very large sum for her. How can this amount of money not be enough? If 3 billion gold equals 3 billion won, that's enough money to buy a house in her past life. If she had that amount of money, she could dress fashionably. She can buy herself anything she wants. There was only one thing Ilya didn't understand: why he was giving her so much. For her, there is no downside to this contract. On the contrary, there are only pros. She will live here like a queen. Suddenly, Ilya was surprised. Was this really a payment for silence? Cedric had said it could be, and so to speak, that comes in here too. To be precise, it's a sum to compensate for the 3 years confinement. It will be a very different life in the duchy than at home. At first, Ilya didn't understand why her freedom would be restricted, and Cedric asked her to look at paragraph 6 and on the second page. It said that the girl must be accompanied by either him or Calibi when she wants to go outside the duchy. She is not allowed to leave the duchy on her own. Or I said she saw the clause and read it carefully, but it's not restraint, it's not imprisonment. It's just an escort. In other words, she can't go outside the duchy without him or Caliba. The girl. She had realized that by now. She looked at the contract again as if she were thinking and staring at it. After another second, she came to her senses and looked at Cedric. She didn't realize what he had just said. After all, she was very engrossed in reading the contract. Cedric said that an order of knights would be formed to protect her. All the servants around her would be from his entourage. They will be his ears and eyes, and they will also keep the girl safe from unforeseen circumstances. What he's saying now? The girl thought again. As long as she stays in the duchy, and that's the first 3 years, he'll keep an eye on every one of hers. With movement, Ilya sat and thought. She didn't know if this was good or bad, how she would feel if the Duke was watching her every move. Ilya looked at the Duke carefully. There were a lot of thoughts in her head. Cedric looked directly into the girl's eyes. He was calm and poised. At that moment, I wanted to say something, but all that came out of my mouth was an awkward sound. Suddenly she was cheerful. She said well, and she understood the Duke. The Duke was very surprised by this reaction. He didn't expect the girl to agree so quickly. After all, not everyone likes to have their freedom restricted. Once again, he asked again. Did she agree with the clause about restricting freedom? The girl said yes, and she was fine with it. She says it's because she can't tell him all the information about herself. If he just wants to see if she can be trusted, there is no reason to refuse. It was normal that the Duke suspected her, but Cedric didn't think she would agree to it so easily. And she remembered a moment from her past life. Asked where she was going during the workout, the girl said that she had left something at home and needed to leave the gym urgently. So, limiting her freedom is not new to her. She is already used to constant control. Cedric understood. He quickly and silently lowered his gaze to the contract. After a few minutes, he asked if the girl had read the whole contract. She said yes, she's fine with it, and she thinks nothing needs to be changed. Cedric said that if she wanted to add anything to or remove anything from the contract, she should just let him know. He would consider her suggestion if it made sense. The girl thought again. Everything was so well and thoughtfully spelled out in the contract that she didn't know what else to add, and she couldn't believe that the Duke had done it all in one day. When Cedric's curse is lifted, she will be paid 3 billion gold pieces. She will use the money to buy a house in the middle of nowhere and enjoy her comfortable life alone. Alone. Now that word never sounded better. She was already used to being alone. She had been living with Khalib for weeks now. The boy took her hand when they went for walks. They were having fun and it was wonderful. And I was lonely. They had a lot of fun when they lived at Ilya's house, and here there are more buildings and a bigger area to walk around. The girl remembered the caliber, laughing merrily. After a little thought, Ilya said she wanted to add one more item. She said it would be when they were divorced. She'd like to visit Kalibo in the duchy once in a while. If that's possible, of course. Cedric made surprised eyes again. He hadn't expected to hear that. He once again asked if she wanted to see his brother Kalibo once in a while. The girl asked not to be misunderstood. She said that when she's around Khalib, she feels her memories slowly coming back. That probably sounds like a lot. But the girl knows that he looks like someone she cared a lot about in her past life. Ilya had something else to add. Well, she asked Cedric not to take it into his head, but Cedric continued to stare at the girl in surprise. Suddenly he said, well, he will add this clause in the contract for sure. The girl was very surprised. Cedric said after a moment's thought that before adding this clause to the contract, we should ask Khalib's opinion. If he doesn't mind, then we will add this clause to the contract for sure. Ilya said fine. She gave a weighty laugh and thanked Cedric. The man just sat there silently looking at Ilya. She was simply dazzling as she laughed. Cedric said they would arrange a meeting later. That suited Ilya just fine. And the girl quickly left Cedric's office. As she walked out the door, she stopped. She was a little upset. So she put her head down and thought. She wasn't supposed to do that. All of a sudden she's screaming that she likes everything. She just wanted to sort out all her problems and live alone in peace. She didn't realize what was wrong with her at that moment. But she was overwhelmed with a sense of joy for the fact that she would be able to see Khalib in the future, and the feelings at that moment were on par. But for useless things. At that moment a maid came to the girl's place. The maid heard Aaliyah talking to herself, and she called out to her mistress. The maid wondered if the girl had something wrong. After all, she clenched her hands very tightly. At that moment, Aaliyah was waving her clenched hands in a fist to the sides. I said that nothing had happened to her and everything was fine. She knew it was selfish, but it would be nice to see him once in a while. Aaliyah started down the corridor. There was just a little bit left for him not to notice. Just a little bit. At this point, Cedric picked up the contract again. He brought it up to his eyes and began to reread it carefully. One thing that surprised him was that the girl immediately agreed to the restraint. At that moment, his assistant Edwin came up to Cedric. He said that Mrs. Aaliyah was a real beauty, and he asked Cedric if he thought so too. Edwin was fascinated by the Cedric. He had never seen such mysterious eyes before. Cedric said that, as they say, with eyes that look like jewels, only a small portion of fairies are considered to be fairies. He thought she might be one of them. Edwin wondered, could Mistress Aaliyah really be a fairy? Cedric asked his assistant if he had ever met a purebred fairy. She's probably just a mestizo, and she has mixed blood of different people in her. But the girl was unusual. Everyone could see that. Edwin would have believed it if Cedric had said she was pureblood. After all, it wasn't just her eyes that were beautiful. Everything about her was beautiful. Long, loose hair, a sonorous voice, and an extraordinary laugh. Edwin was so fascinated. He wanted to say that she was indeed a fairy. But at that moment, when he glanced at Cedric, he met the Duke's cold gaze. He quickly calmed down and said he wasn't thinking of anything like that. Cedric said that it was commendable that he had assessed the situation quickly. Edwin understood. He guessed right away that Cedric was jealous. But it's only an arranged marriage. He just treasures Aaliyah because she's the most likely to help him break the curse. Cedric hated people touching his things. Edwin realized that he would have to be careful now. He wanted to live a long time. He also didn't want to die at the hands of the Duke. Suddenly, Cedric said that Edwin was right. Aaliyah was an extraordinary girl. She stood out even when she lived in a simple house. If you think about it, she really looked like a pure-blooded fairy, though he didn't know Aaliyah's real personality. But judging at first glance, she is a very emotional and kind person. This girl was very different from the Duke himself. When she saw the amount she was allocated for expenses, she was shocked. She even cried out. After that, she quickly covered her mouth with her hands. She realized that she needed to behave with more restraint, but she couldn't help it. In a second, she was already laughing merrily. The girl seemed to radiate kindness and happiness. She infected everyone around with her cheerful mood, and even the Duke's face, who was always a little wordy and cold, became happy and smiling. At the memory of Aaliyah, flowers bloomed in the Duke's soul, and he caught himself thinking that when he sees this girl, something happens to him. His assistant Edwin was also standing next to Cedric, and he asked his Duke if he had just smiled. Edwin began to look at Cedric from all angles. Could he really be right? Could he really be smiling now? Edwin was right after all. The deputy hadn't seen him smile for a very long time. At this point, Cedric couldn't stand it and threw the sheets of paper in his face. He said that the young man was beginning to annoy him for some reason. Cedric said he was going to have lunch with the Caliban, and the Duke also asked his assistant to sort through the remaining papers on his desk. Edwin was simply stunned. After all, there were a large number of documents on the desk. Deputy Edwin realized that this was a punishment from the Duke for his excessive talkativeness. At that moment, Cedric was walking down the corridor and thinking, one less problem to worry about. The grim contract was signed. Now all that's left is to get busy with the wedding preparations. In his opinion, everything was going very smoothly, but there are some misunderstandings. Cedric couldn't figure out what floral scent was coming off this girl. He could hear it clearly. Maybe he's just imagining it. Maybe that scent is just in his head. Cedric decided that the curse had caused him to lose his sense of smell. He certainly couldn't smell it. And so the dawn came. Events were taking place in the duchy. There was sliced meat on the table. On top of the piece of meat was decorated with sliced mushrooms as well as vegetables. Caliban was sitting at the table. It was dinner with his brother. Caleb was surprised by something. Could it really be true? Is it really, or did she really say that? Cedric said it was right. When the curse is lifted and they're divorced, she'd like to visit Caliban in the duchy once in a while. Caleb was just happy. Did Aaliyah ask to see him even after the divorce? That means she wants to be with him and spend time with him. Maybe it was just hard for her to answer before. The boy needed to think of something else. He really wanted to keep Aaliyah in the duchy after his divorce from his brother, and the young man said that he would, of course, agree. He looked at his brother carefully. He could see that his brother was in a high spirits now. It was not always possible to see Caleb in such a mood. This girl was a very positive influence on the boy. Cedric wanted to discuss with his brother what they would do after the contact was over. The boy was willing to talk and listen to his brother. He was very pleased to be considered. A strawberry cake lay in front of Caleb. They were in the dining room. There were chairs here as if they were the throne of a king. There were various paintings on the walls, and also the whole room was decorated with moldings. On second thought, and Cedric asked Caleb about etiquette classes starting tomorrow. She said he would attend them with Aaliyah from now on. Khalib sighed. The time for rest was over. Some thought should be given to studying. He had to concentrate on his studies again. The fact that he would be studying with Aaliyah, he decided to try hard. Cedric looked at the boy carefully. The girl really does work wonders. Cedric looked at his brother. He wondered why he looked so unhappy. He thought the boy would be very happy as he would be coming to class. He was glad when he recognized the girl's requests. It was complicated. Their relationship was anything but smooth. If only his brother would tell him everything he was feeling. At this time, Aaliyah went out into the garden. She was very happy to see what a variety of colors there were. She had never seen such a thing. It was just some kind of paradise. Because the weather was just fine. The sun was shining, the dazzling girl covered one eye. She was just happy. She would very much like to go for a walk with Khalib now. She would like the boy to give her a tour of the Hertz. At first she thought she wouldn't fit in here, but now she's glad because all the people around her have turned out to be so kind. It's only been 1 day since she arrived, but she still hasn't encountered any vassals. Later on, one would have to find out about what they were like. The girls would really like to see them. In a moment, she imagined the ladies of high society starting to tell her how she dared to marry Cedric. It was simply impossible. The girl really hoped it would be far from that. It's certainly not going to happen because of rumors of a curse. She needed to get her memory back right now. While the girl was walking and daydreaming, there was a conversation in her ear. Someone was discussing something. There were female voices talking. One of the voices asked if it was true or not. A little further away stood 3 maids. They were discussing something. Another voice said it was the very real truth. And Cedric is dining together. One of the maids said it had been a long time since she had seen it. Aaliyah was also surprised. Could it be that the 2 brothers are now having lunch together? They seemed to be discussing something right now. Or was it better not to interfere in their conversation and leave? But somehow they were still uncomfortable with each other. The girl thought for a moment. What would it take to get the brothers to communicate more with each other and understand each other half-heartedly? At this point, Aaliyah's ear became like a hearing tube. The brothers have a very good relationship, but for some reason there's such an awkward atmosphere right now. And they are brothers after all. One of the maids said they talked a little about Mistress Aaliyah and then dined in silence. They were very painful to look at. The girl didn't expect Khalib and Cedric to have such a relationship. After all, in the original story, they were very friendly. Aaliyah thought for a moment. Only now was she thinking about it. They must have sat down at the table by now. The maid asked Ellie why she was dining separately from Khalib and Cedric. A girl would really like to get close to her maid Olivia. Well heard they always have lunch together. Aaliyah just couldn't stop the 2 brothers from chatting. Olivia was very much surprised. How could she interrupt the brothers' communication if they were eating in silence and not communicating at all? The maid's face became very surprised. Looking at her, I realized that something was wrong. Olivia looked embarrassed and said that everything was fine. And she just thought for a second. So here's the thing. There was a problem between the brothers that she knew absolutely nothing about. At that moment, someone called out to Aaliyah. The voice was very familiar. It was definitely Caliban. The boy silked Ali and waved cheerfully. He was saying he was here. The girl ran towards him. She asked the boy how long he had been waiting for her here. Khalib said absolutely not. He had just arrived. Khalib thought it was probably hard to be alone in the palace. After all, the girl is still completely unaccustomed to the new place. It was a very different place from where she had lived before. Aaliyah said she's doing well. She feels safe because Olivia is taking good care of her. Aaliyah asked how lunch with his brother Cedric had gone. He was overjoyed. Khalib didn't seem to hear Aaliyah. He was flying in the clouds. The boy said it had been great, and he laughed merrily. Leah was very pleased to be so happy and smiling. This boy was like a copy of her dead brother. Aaliyah decided that right now it was necessary to put all thoughts and problems aside and concentrate on walking with Khalib. At that moment, the boy quickly grabbed the girl's hand and told her to follow him. They were standing on the bridge, I quickly grabbed the railing and motioned for the boy to look over there. Something caught her eye very strongly. But the boy, thinking the girl was about to fall into the river, grabbed her by the dress and dragged her. He shouted for her to be careful not to fall into the pond. A little later, Elia told him that it was a flower blossom they had seen in the forest. The boy did not understand what the flower was and where it was blooming. He asked the girl to show it to him. The girl quickly grabbed either in her arms and said they had to run. Khalib was against the girl, carrying him in her arms. He was perfectly capable of getting around on his own. They walked around the garden for a very long time. When they could no longer stand, they sat down on a bench. Elia said they had a lot of fun together today. Khalib agreed with her. When Elia was by his side, he felt insanely happy. The boy was just glowing with happiness. Elia. Watching the boy couldn't take her eyes off him. He was just so cute, and so much like her brother. Looking at him made her heart warm. Khalib said he knows what to do now. I wasn't quite sure what he was talking about. Khalib said that after meeting with the etiquette teacher, he learnt that he would now be studying with Aaliyah. He figured the girl would be very disappointed when she saw his immature side. Elia was surprised. Could he really think that about her? Khalib said he really likes her. He really likes spending time with her. So he won't let her be disappointed in him. He'll do his best in class, and he'll do brilliantly. These words impressed Elia very much. Was the boy so afraid lest the girl should be disappointed in him? Elia asked Khaliba to wait. She has absolutely no intention of being disappointed in him because of his immaturity. Khalib said it's only natural. People don't like people who don't succeed. Elia was angry that the boy was like that and said, Khalib admitted that he'd been told that once. Elia wondered, who could have told him that? If he fails, Elia will be disappointed in him. It sounded kind of contradictory. Had the boy been told she would be disappointed? I wonder if when they told him that, they specifically mentioned her name. The frustrating thing was that Caliban believed it, and he was really starting to think that. Although he didn't know that love and good treatment were not only because of whether a person could do something or not, whether he can do something well, or whether he can do it not so well. It was as if everything was just as it should be. Elia wondered if that was what the etiquette teacher had told him when they met this morning. The girl's face changed. Khalib noticed that. He asked if something was wrong. The boy quickly stroked Elia's cheek. He could see that the girl was very angry. Elia was completely out of her depth. How could a small child be taught such a thing all the time? What kind of etiquette teacher is this? It's like he's deliberately indoctrinating the boy. And she remembered the day that Calibi had been injured, when she took his hand in hers and saw the blood on his arm. She also remembered the moment when the boy said that if he gained weight and looked bad at the event. So the etiquette teacher told him not to eat dinner. And he has been skipping dinner every day for 2 months now. And all this happens to a boy after an encounter with an etiquette teacher. After a little thought or turning to the boy, she asked him to show her his palms. The events took place in Hurt standing. Elia and Kaylee were sitting on a bench. The sun was already sinking lower and lower. Soon it would be evening. The boy slowly raised his hands and wanted to show them. Elia's face changed. At that moment, she saw what Khalib's hands looked like. She realized it now. She had seen those marks when she first met him. Now she realized that they were blow marks. She looked at the boy's little hands. I couldn't believe it. Her hands were covered with bloody wounds. She confessed that she had noticed them the day they first met. Could he be wearing gloves on purpose to hide those marks? Maybe someone threatened him. The boy said that was absolutely not true, and he was just being punished accordingly because he was missing a lot. He will see them in him. The boy tried his best to defend the etiquette teacher. He said that the etiquette teacher wasn't bad, but that he wasn't good enough. And he gets the punishment he deserves because he still has a lot of work to do to be perfect. In Khalib's head, it seemed to sound like a spell. People would hate him if he fell behind the program. The wounds from the blows must be covered because they are evidence of his shortcomings. He is being punished because he is not good enough. Elia was surprised by the fact that Callie trusted his teacher completely. And it was nothing short of brainwashing, a kind of hypnosis, when a boy had some rubbish drummed into his head every day. Elia remembered that in the original story, the Caliba etiquette teacher was Jersey Babylon. The teacher was the daughter of the Reynold of Babylon, the elder brother of the previous duchess and a vassal of the Indigentia family. Not all the inhabitants of the duchy were described in great detail in the novel, but the girl remembered it well. Reynold had tried his best to marry off his daughter to Cedric, but his plan had failed because Cedric had refused to marry her off when the curse intensified. His intentions were all too obvious. Now, little by little, everything is falling into place. And if everything he said is true, or I asked Caliban, did he ever talk to Cedric about etiquette lessons? The boy said no. He was afraid his brother would be disappointed when he found out. Khalib very rarely shared information about lessons with his brother. The etiquette teacher also warned the boy that it was best not to show his brother the marks from the blows. He'll only distract his brother too much. Or I get it. The etiquette teacher just had it all perfectly planned. She said that during every meal together, he annoys him. E2 has to talk to him, and at that moment he feels uncomfortable around him because he is not good enough. Therefore, Calibi absolutely does not want to eat together with his brother. Said he needed to study even harder. He needs to put even more of his strength into it, and only then would he be perfect. Well, sure, the etiquette teacher knows better what he's missing, Ilya, than what the Caleb is telling now. That's what she thought. That's the reason for the strange relationship between the brothers. Khalib's etiquette lessons were just to turn him against his brother, and the boy believed it. This is most likely their plan to conquer the Duchy of Indigenate. Reynold used vassals to trap Khaliba and manipulated the boy into pretending to care. Khalib should have believed her words, and he really did. He didn't think he was good enough, not smart enough, and if it showed, everyone around him would be disappointed with him. The only way out is to find a way for the brothers to get along. If the brothers get along, it'll interfere with their plans. So she convinced Khaliba that Cedric hates him. Khalib believed Gerald and began to keep his distance from his brother. He didn't want to get close to him. He didn't want to have lunch with him. At that moment, Cedric most likely thought that his brother just hated him and didn't want to talk to him. So he avoided the boy too. He didn't socialize with him, didn't spend much time with him. They acted as if they were strangers to each other. Aaliyah realized that Cedric didn't know how to express his feelings. He needs to care for Caliber a lot more and let him feel his love. Immediately, he realized that Caliber had begun to trust and it was the first time he'd ever seen him like this. It's all because, she was just nice to him. She loved him. Realized all this, the girl clutched her dress with her hands. Even though Cedric knew the quickest way to get rid of the curse, he was willing to give it up for his brother. Before he died, he asked his brother, would he have done it if he didn't care about him? But in this state of Caliber, I couldn't think straight. And it's all because of Gerald and Reynold. It was a well-thought-out plan, well thought out down to the smallest detail. Seeing Aaliyah thinking, the boy turned to her. Aaliyah quickly jumped up from the bench, walked over to the Caliban and crouched down on her knees. She took his hands in hers and looked him straight in the eyes. She asked him why he was acting like this. She should have noticed it back in the woods. They were certainly not unusual abrasions at all. She didn't realize that the boy was being whipped, and he's just afraid to admit or say anything. Leah said that this is not a good way to teach children at all. It's not the way to teach children, it's just bullying. He shouldn't be penalized. Even if he's made mistakes, he doesn't need to think it's his fault. It doesn't have to be that way at all. Khalib didn't understand. Is it wrong? The boy looked surprised into the girl's eyes. It was right, it's wrong. Not everything an ethics teacher says is true. You don't need to fill your head with the nonsense the etiquette teacher makes up. And the girl gently took Khalibo's hand. Khalib didn't understand why it was like this. After all, the etiquette teacher had been selected after an interview at the duchy. Elia had said that education was not all there was to know about a person. Education can't tell you everything about a person. When the boy was told that this was all being done just for his future, the girl wondered what it felt like at that moment. Khalib thought about how he just wasn't trying hard enough. But it wasn't like that. I was interested in the boy's emotions. She wondered what emotions overwhelmed him when he heard those words from his teacher. But the boy only kept silent and looked at Aaliyah in surprise. He didn't seem to understand what she was talking about. After a little thought, he looked at his hands again. He remembered the events that happened in class. He remembered being beaten, and the boy said he was probably sad at that moment. And the boy lowered his eyes to the ground. He wanted to know if it was true, but didn't know who he could ask. Always wanted to go up to his only and favorite brother, Cedric. But I was afraid. Afraid he'd hate you even more. These thoughts never left his head. He didn't want to be hated, so he had no choice. And the boy looked upset. Aaliyah addressed him by name again. She gently continued to hold his hand. Caleb wondered what he should do now. Now he didn't know what to believe. And since he liked Aaliyah so much, he wanted to believe everything she said. But now he was in a kind of confusion. And it was so stupid. The boy was very upset. And Aaliyah noticed it. She stroked his cheek. She asked him to believe in himself more. He can do a lot more than he thinks he can. Tears came to the boy's eyes. Leah asked him to have more faith in himself and then everything would be okay. The boy stared wide-eyed. It was very bad for him to live without his parents. He did not remember his mom well. He had no one to hug and caress him. He did not know what love and affection were. Tears flowed from Caleb's eyes. But now he was willing. And he was willing to change. To change for the better. The sun was almost over the horizon. A new moon had come into the sky. It got dark outside. The events took place when I was a child. Ilya walked quickly down the corridor. She kept thinking and couldn't stop. Her hands were clenched into fists. She was very, very angry. She couldn't believe Ronaldo and Jerry would do that to a boy. They just weren't human. At this point, she had already taken Khaliba to her room. She was on her way, and she had a great desire to deal with these people once and for all. She wanted to find them in the duchy right now and tell them to their faces. She also had a great desire to hit them at least once. She needed to calm herself down right now. She needed to do something about her anger. At that moment, someone called out. The girl was a little surprised and stopped. She looked round and saw Cedric in front of her. The man asked if she was still walking with Caleb in the garden, still stood like that and watched the girl carefully. At this moment, Aaliyah had already calmed herself a little. Cedric asked the girl how she liked the castle. I was a little dumbfounded. She didn't know what to say right now. After all, Calibi had asked her not to tell his brother yet. He really wanted to talk to his brother himself, but he was still scared. He apologized to Aaliyah, and at that moment I stood there unable to utter a word. She looked into Cedric's blue eyes, and in that moment, for the first time, she couldn't find the words. Pulling herself together a little, she said they had a lot of fun on the walk. Cedric's face became surprised. She quickly turned away and asked me to forgive her, and quickly began to walk away. Cedric didn't understand why the girl was acting like that now. She had it in her head that if he was an adult, he should act like one. He should take good care of his younger brother. But she wasn't going to tell him that now. It doesn't matter anymore. After all, there was no need to think about what had already been done. And right now, it was necessary to think about tomorrow's etiquette lesson. First of all, she needs to separate Gerald and Reynold. In other words, the etiquette teacher should just be fired. Reynold is a vassal. If his daughter is removed from office, there will be criticism. It would be very difficult to do it alone. To get Caleb out of the brainwashing as quickly as possible was the best way. The girl walked down the corridor, her mind racing with thoughts. She needed to think this night through. She needed to do the right thing, find the right words. It's very important. Before she leaves the duchy, she'll kick Gerald out of here first. The girl just doesn't want to let the little boy be bullied anymore. This is absolutely not the training a child should have. That said, Cedric will be very surprised by Aaliyah's behavior. Morning came. Events were taking place in the duchy. Aaliyah told her maid she'd be back soon. Olivia said okay, and if she needed anything, she could call her any time. Aaliyah prayed she could make it work. She thought about it through the night, but she still couldn't figure out how to get rid of Gerald. There's only one way to fire her without revealing the Caliban situation, and this operation is called Use Cedric. He's the only one who can help in this situation. Firstly, we need to find some faults in the first class and tell Cedric about them. For example, the lesson was very strange with that etiquette teacher, and also convince him not to keep doing it. Secondly, Cedric will question Jerry's abilities. Aaliyah will keep saying that the lesson is very strange. Gerald is behaving very strangely. Cedric will definitely listen to Aaliyah, and as a result, he'll find a new teacher for Caleb. Such a way to get rid of Jerry. Even if it's a failed plan, there was simply no other way out. She didn't know what else to think of. Other novels, the protagonist is usually smart and miraculously solves all problems. But Aaliyah didn't know anything about how they did it, so she would do what her heart told her to do. After all, she can't just beat her, because the loser will leave the version. That would be a good option, but you can't do that. It was all very difficult. At that moment, Aaliyah saw the Caliban. The boy asked if she enjoyed this morning's meal. The boy looked happy and smiled. Aaliyah was also very happy to see the boy, especially when he's in such a great mood. Aaliyah asked Caleb if they could eat together next time. The boy said that of course they would, and they would definitely have breakfast next time. By the look of the boy, the girl realized that he has had a good night's sleep. He is in a good mood, cheerful and happy. But she was still worried about him. Suddenly, a maid peeked through the door. Olivia informed Prince Caleb and Lady Aaliyah that Gerald, the daughter of the Marquis of Babylon, had arrived. Aaliyah tried to keep his cool. Here she came, and Mistress asked her to come in. Mentally, the girl asked herself to be ready. At that moment, the etiquette teacher on the left entered the room, bowed, and greeted Lady Aaliyah. Her name is Gerald Babylon. From now on, she'll be teaching them etiquette. The girl said she wasn't good enough, but counted on her help in the future. Aaliyah was surprised. It was different from what she imagined. Or I told Jerry she was happy to meet him, too. Jerry said she had a very nice voice, and both girls started laughing. Neither one realized what was happening now. This was not at all how Aaliyah wanted to meet this teacher. The teacher asked Mr. Kaliba to answer these questions. The teacher suggested starting with the simplest one, namely gate. Everyone was in agreement. The teacher asked Aaliyah to walk round the room as she usually does. Aaliyah, with a little thought, said okay, she will do it now. The girl didn't think she would actually teach, and Aaliyah walked quickly round the room. Gerald just mouthed God. Aaliyah didn't realize if it was all that good or all that bad in her gait. The teacher said that her gait was excellent. At the same time, the teacher always laughed and looked happy. The teacher said that she had to naturally edit a few things and it would be perfect. Aaliyah didn't expect her to say that about her gait. It was very predictable. Gerald clearly had a plan. And despite the teacher's efforts to appear very kind and good, or saw the effects of the lessons on Caleb's hands, the girl was just glowing and smiling. She had earrings with green stones on her ears. There was also a green stone on her brooch. The girl had blonde hair and glasses on her eyes. Her eyes were almost always covered when she smiled. And so the teacher said that the next lesson was coming up, and she once again said that Lady Ellie was just great. Teacher Gerald just showered the girl with compliments. And so the third lesson began. The teacher said it was a difficult lesson, but they did very well. Aaliyah didn't understand why she was acting like this at the moment. This lesson was the beginning of gate correction. If she treated her badly, or I would have kicked her out right away. But she treats her completely differently. She wants her to like her and praises the girl all the time. Suddenly, Jaren looked at Aaliyah with her green eyes. The teacher stopped laughing and looked serious. At that moment, her green eyes became visible. The teacher said that as a girl knows she trains many nobles, but compared to others, Aaliyah doesn't learn from mistakes at all and is too slow to internalize everything. If she continues like this, Mr. Cedric will be very disappointed. And here's the moment Gerald showed her true colors. She's been manipulating Caliban too. And now she's trying to do it to Aaliyah. She's got it in her head that she's not perfect enough. Aaliyah didn't understand why the etiquette teacher had brought up Cedric, why he should be disappointed in her. Cedric was very popular today. He had been brought up a record number of times today. Recommended that the girl focus and put her best effort into it. Jerry said that the girl should look dignified at the wedding. The teacher was sure that Aaliyah would do well. And the power is only to trust the teacher. The girl must know that Jerry is doing it for her own good. Aaliyah smiled cheerfully behind her. Was she now Yes, indeed, she is at this point trying to manipulate her. But she's not a little kid in front of her. It's a grown-up girl who will be difficult if not impossible to manipulate. At that, the teacher smiled happily and covered her eyes. When she was told that Jerry was going to teach some maiden, she jumped up from her chair. The chair fell to the floor with a thud. The girl screamed that she hated it. She asked her father if he meant to say that she should teach some motherless maiden. The father tried to calm his daughter down, because even if he wanted to, there's nothing you can do about it. It's Cedric's orders. She also tried to say something to her father, but she just had to calm down and take the situation for granted. Gerald's mother said it was to make her a duchess. Gerald should know that and realize it herself. You just have to accept it. Jerry was stunned. Did her mother really support her father too? How could they do this to her? Even if it is Cedric's order, they made the decision without even consulting Gerald herself. She had studied so hard at the academy to teach a commoner, and the girl sobbed bitterly. She thought very highly of herself. She could do better. Father asked if he hadn't promised her. When they kick Caleb out of the duchy, Cedric will become Erzduke, and then they'll make her an Erzduchess. Father said that soon the Indigentia family would be completely in their hands, so you must be very patient. Gerald understood. She was ready to fight for the title. But the teacher said if Elia finds out everything, then what does she do with Caleb? Father said not to worry about it. After all, the boy already trusts his teacher completely, so there shouldn't be a problem. No one knew how Elia had managed to win the boy's favor. But in such a short period of time, she would not have been able to win the boy's favor. Even if she finds out, there's nothing she can do. She can't have an influence on Cedric or Caliber. They just need to get her out of the duchy as soon as possible. Gerald if they can. But Father confirmed it, that it's entirely possible. A commoner remains a commoner, even if elevated in status. She can't hide her flaws, and they're bound to take advantage of that. You just have to be the perfect daughter of the Marquis. She needs to manipulate Elia any way she can. If she succeeds, of course. And Gerald gave in. She told Father he could count on her. The girl was a little worried. She had very little time to build a relationship, but it seemed easier than she thought it would be. Or maybe she just thought it was. At this rate, and she looked closely at Elia. At this point, the girl said that everything is correct. As an etiquette teacher, she can clearly see everything Elia is missing. Elia was worried about it too. Gerald was triumphant. She's getting it too easy. At that moment, Elia said that she had talked to Cedric about it. Suddenly, Gerald had a very surprised look on her face. I said Jerry's a noblewoman and she's a commoner. People will judge them and she just can't just not be around a Cedric. At that moment, Gerald's face turned pale. She stood staring at the girl in surprise. But when a warm wind blew across the flower field, Cedric came up to her and said. He addressed the girl by name. He said he didn't care what her abilities or status were. He doesn't care what anyone else thinks. He asked her to just be with him, because she was the one he fell in love with. And in front of Gerald's eyes became the plot of Cedric explaining his love to Elia, and her explaining her love to him. Elia said that since then she has been thinking about Cedric's words constantly. That's why status and ability all pale in the face of love. That's why Cedric will never be disappointed in her. After all, this man is very admirable. Gerald recovered a little from the shock and said, That's right. Mr. Cedric was right. But in her heart the girl was thinking of something else entirely. Shouldn't she feel a little frightened? Only compliments at first. And then she started insulting her. She should be offended. But something was wrong with her, and the girl looked surprised, looking straight into her eyes. It was as if Elia was dreaming of a Cedric. She felt happy, and the insults Jael sent her didn't concern her at all. It was written all over Gerald's face what she was thinking. She's trying to brainwash her and get rid of her. Leah really wanted to hit her on the head but held back. Suddenly, Elia came to his senses. She hadn't heard anything, and she turned her attention to the boy. Caleb was sitting at the table reading a book. Thank God he was very engrossed in the book. Gerald was a scum of the earth, and mentally Elia wished her to be the first to fly out of the duchy. At that moment, the girl asked if her gate was finished for the day. Gerald was a little miffed and couldn't say anything. Mentally, Elia wanted to just call it a day already. What else was she going to do? Gerald looked at the girl in surprise. She smiled after that, but remained silent at the same time. Suddenly, she said that they were not finished yet. Now they need to move on to advanced studies. Gerald looked kind of sinister. She said that she had prepared the shoes especially for practicing the gate. At that moment, the maid brought the shoes into the room on a pad. Elia only glanced at them and noted that the heels of the shoes were too high. There was no way she would wear them. Well, Gerald insisted that the girl wear them. The etiquette teacher asked Lady Elia to put them on and walk in them this time, and they both laughed. Isn't it a little early to prepare such a thing for a beginner? No, to make progress, you have to replicate real-life situations. It would be nice to get used to walking in high heels. Jerry had a very good tongue. Elia decided that she was bound to get a little bit of a pass. Right now, she needed to pretend to be interested in the lesson. Elia was in agreement. She asked if they needed to be dressed right now. Gerald said yes. The girl quickly put on her shoes and stood on them. She was very uncomfortable. The heel was too high. Before her rebirth, she very rarely wore heels, but her teacher praised her. She said she was doing very well. Now the etiquette teacher asked the girl to walk a little faster in her shoes. Does she really want Aaliyah to fall? Does Gerald really think she's going to fall right off? Well, Aaliyah was sure that she would do just fine. After all, the teacher underestimates her abilities. And she walked briskly across the room. There was only one thing Aaliyah didn't realize: what she was up to. At that moment, the heel broke off, and Aaliyah began to fall. The sound caught Khalib's attention, and the boy turned his head quickly at the noise. Aaliyah crouched on the floor. At that moment, Aaliyah ran up to her. She asked if she was okay, and how it happened, and if she could get up. Aaliyah really wanted to know what she was up to this time. But who would have thought Gerald would break her heels? She built it on purpose so that the girl would fall right down the center of the hall. It's her account teacher who's a bastard. Or I tried to get up, but she was having a hard time. Gerald couldn't believe that the shoes prepared by the maids turned out to have broken heels. It was really quite horrible. Since the teacher in the classroom is responsible for her students, Gerald promised to punish the maid who prepared those shoes. Was against it. At that moment, a Caliber ran up to the girl. He asked if she was all right and if she had hurt herself. Elia said that she was fine and he didn't have to worry. Caleb said it was better to finish the lesson for the day. He suggested that Ela go to the room and treat the wound. But the girl said it wasn't necessary, she was fine. Gerald said, just like the boy said, today's class is over. The etiquette teacher asked Elia to get a good night's rest. Ellie agreed and smiled sweetly as well. It was a very strange smile, though. She just acted like a child. For a few more minutes, Gerald looked at Aaliyah and Khalib. Aaliyah was sitting on her bed. The doctor had come into the room and was examining the girl's feet. Because she had fallen off her heels, her foot was a little sore. Khalib was very worried about the girl, so he decided to call the doctor to examine her. Fortunately, the bones were intact. Aaliyah said not to worry too much. She only had a scratch. The doctor said that if the girl used the ointment, the skin would heal quickly. Frequent washing of the wound was necessary to prevent it from festering. Aaliyah was in complete agreement, and so the doors to her room closed, and she was left with only Khalib. Khalib asked Ali one more time if she was okay. She said she was fine, after all, she is very strong. She was very pleased that the boy was not cared for. She also took care of him when he needed help and support. Aaliyah looked happy. The girl asked Khaliba to sit next to her, and she pointed with her hand to a spot on the bed beside her. But Calibi was in no hurry to sit down next to her. He apologized and said he had another lesson to teach. The boy promised to come back after class. Khalib asked the girl to get a good rest. She told him to go to class and come back to her as soon as possible. The boy walked out the door and quickly closed it behind him. He stopped near the closed door and thought for a moment. After that, he slowly turned round and walked away. The maid was also very worried about her mistress. She was very happy that she didn't have a fracture. The maid was very frightened when she heard that Aaliyah had fallen. Or I apologized to the maid for making me worry. She was even more surprised when she saw Mr. Caliban trying to carry her in his arms. He claimed he would definitely carry her. But Aaliyah said she was fine, and she could move on her own, not even move and dance. Olivia laughed merrily. Aaliyah too, I remembered that moment. The maid said she shouldn't go and claim her leg today. If she thinks she needs anything, the maid is always there to help. Aaliyah said she was fine. Olivia said it wouldn't work that way. After all, practically everyone in the duchy is very worried about her. Aaliyah was very pleased to hear that. The maid asked the girl to try and get some rest today. Finally, the girl was alone in the room. She breathed out a sigh of relief and told herself that she had done well today. Today she wanted to kick Jerry out of here. She made either of them worry. The girl couldn't even imagine Jerry's shoes doing that. The only thing she can do is tell Cedric. She didn't think this summer's teacher would be so unpredictable. Gerald was born into a wealthy family. All her wishes were immediately fulfilled quickly and unconditionally. But she continues to crave more. Caleb is all grown up now. If you look at Gerald's actions, you can tell that all the members of the Marcus family are the same. And Aaliyah quickly grabbed the sheets. She was thinking about something. At that moment, the girl called for her maid. She asked Olivia if she could have the etiquette teacher here. At this moment, Jeria was already heading to Aaliyah's room. As soon as she walked in, she immediately made a regretful face. The etiquette teacher wondered how early she was, as if she was really very worried about the girl. Aaliyah asked the teacher not to worry. After all, she was perfectly fine. Gerald pretended that she was very happy to hear that. She was very worried. At that moment, Aaliyah asked Olivia to leave them alone with the teacher. The maid bowed and said she would wait for her outside. Aaliyah thanked the maid. At this time, the etiquette teacher stood and primly smiled. And so they were left alone in the room. Gerald couldn't wait to find out why Aaliyah had called her over to her place. Gerald said that, as Aaliyah had asked her not to punish the maid, but she didn't understand how such a mistake could be forgiven. It turned out that Lady Ellie was a real angel. Or listened to those words from the etiquette teacher and silently looked straight into her eyes. Or said she didn't punish the maid because it wasn't her at all. Gerald's eyes widened. She once again rephrased what she had just said. You asked her if the girl was going to continue with this act. Aaliyah asked the etiquette teacher not to smile or try to be friendly. The Migam etiquette teacher's face turned stern. After a moment's thought, she said, "Let's keep it that way. After all, they were the only ones in this room." The girl told Aaliyah that she doesn't know how she got to the duchy, but she must know that here the influence of the family and wine is very great. And if Aaliyah thinks she's become someone very important, she's deluded, and she's ready to tell her the truth. Gerald told Aaliyah that she was nothing, and she falls into the category of people who lose their heads at the whim of power. Aaliyah asked the teacher why she was doing all this. Doesn't she feel sorry for Kaliba at all? Gerald said she's doing all this for the Archduke's future. She has no reason to feel guilty. Gerald asked Aaliyah, why did she appear so suddenly? Without her, things were going very smoothly in Hertz, and when she showed up and came here, things didn't go as planned. Does Aaliyah mean to say that she supports the master, but the teacher has known him since he was in nappies? Does she, or does she know more about the boy than she does? Or I recognized the young gentleman in about a week. Does she really know him better than she does? The etiquette teacher knows all about him. The person Caliban trusts the most is her. Gerald hoped she understood her position. Meanwhile, Aaliyah sat and looked at her intently. She was silent. That was right. Of course, Caleb spent less time with her than he did with Gerald. His story was not detailed in the novel. She is learning more about life now. She reproaches herself for the careless thoughts she had at first. There must have been a lot of such rubbish around him, and in such a situation he became an archduke on his own. After a little thought, Aaliyah turned to the teacher. Aaliyah said she'd have to leave the duchy soon, but as long as she's there for her, she's ready to teach them a good lesson. Looked the teacher straight in the eye. The teacher's eyes were dilated. At that moment, Aaliyah laughed out loud. She told the teacher that it was her turn, and the girl said the teacher looked just disgusting. After all, you have to let Gerald experience what her victims feel. The girl was always ready to be on Khalib's side in any situation, and Aaliyah reiterated that the teacher looked disgusting. At that, the girl laughed merrily, and the etiquette teacher was angry and gritted her teeth. And here's the teacher calling Aaliyah a motherless wench, so she dares to say that to her. Aaliyah saw Gerald's reaction perfectly well. She knew that she used such expressions most often in her speech. Is it hard to ignore the commoners who insult her? Didn't the academy teach the girl how to speak properly? Aristocrats must always watch their words and behavior. A girl asked her etiquette teacher if she was speaking correctly. The teacher was already getting quite angry. She force-heeled her teeth. In the beginning, she just kept quiet. Then after a while, she said, "If we talk about commoners?" At that moment, the etiquette teacher quickly raised her hand upwards. She asked how dare she teach her. Gerald swung round and wanted to hit the Aaliyah, but she quickly grabbed her hand with her own. Gerald didn't understand why Aaliyah was so strong. Aaliyah kept asking the teacher, does she really want to solve the problem of violence? After all, the teacher herself said that when Aaliyah showed up, things didn't go according to plan. The girl was ready to keep interfering with Babylon's plans, and the girl asked the teacher not to even think of doing anything. It didn't deserve to be used by people like her. At that moment, someone peeked into the room and shouted Aaliyah's name. The girl continued to hold Jay's hand, and together they looked back at those who had just entered the room. The first thing the girls saw was Caleb. Edwin and Cedric were walking behind him. Aaliyah was simply stunned. Aaliyah was surprised. Why did they come here together? Was it Caliban who brought them here? Gerald immediately turned to Cedric San. She quickly pulled her hand out and sighed pitifully. The girl said as Aaliyah suddenly grabbed her hand. Aaliyah was stunned. What is this she is saying now? At this time, the caliber turned to the Marquis's daughter Babylon. Khalib said there's no more work about us here, and the boy asked his etiquette teacher to leave the duchy right now. Aaliyah was stunned. She hadn't expected such behavior from the boy. She wanted so badly to throw that woman out and fire her. But she didn't expect the clip to be the one to do it. Gerald was also very surprised, and once more she asked the boy what he had said. The teacher shouted, "What is this boy talking about? What do you mean she doesn't work here anymore? That's ridiculous." Khalib asked, wondering if she hadn't expected that. Gerald couldn't even imagine such a thing. Why he did it? Colitis had always been on her side, and at that moment the boy took the glove off his hand. Gerald had already guessed what he wanted to show everyone. The boy asked her what she knew best, that it was an informed decision, and he showed his scrawled hands, said they had nothing more to talk about, and he asked the teacher to get out of here immediately. The teacher stood there unable to say a word. That girl must have completely brainwashed him. She had devoted so many years to making this child obedient. At this time, Gerald attempted to address Cedric-san. She said the young gentleman was not learning his lessons well. It was just corporal punishment for educational purposes. It seemed to her that the Lord of Cedric had simply misunderstood, and she was willing to clarify the situation. At that time, Aaliyah intervened in the conversation. She said that it was not right to use corporal punishment. Does the teacher now want to justify herself somehow? But this is nothing but violence. The teacher didn't think it was violence. She thought it was a kind of education for the boy. The girl said that Lady Aaliyah for the first time was receiving an aristocratic education. It might be difficult for her to understand, or I didn't realize what she was saying, or I was getting closer and closer to the teacher. But at that moment someone put his arm around her shoulders. The girl didn't realize who did it at first, and she turned round. What a surprise she was when she saw Cedric hugging her by the shoulders. The teacher still wanted to say something to the Duke, but he had said enough. Cedric wondered if the teacher thought she could get away with it so easily. After all, she had hurt people close to him, and the Duke asked the girl to leave immediately. After the discussion, he would hand everything over to the Marquis of Babylon. Gerald was silent. She didn't know what to say to her. At that moment, her plan fell apart. It was so stupid, this is ridiculous. She couldn't just give up. And the woman demanded proof. She asked for proof that she had done it. At this point, a pause hung in the room. At that moment, the teacher said that the wounds on the young master's hands were from Lady Illy's heels. After all, there was no direct evidence of her guilt. Aaliyah realized that the teacher was ready to go all the way. The teacher said that they couldn't blame her for this, so she too quickly clenched her skirt. She said that she had proof. The teacher told Calibu that he could not solve this problem. To become a duke, he has to work harder. And the teacher realized that it was her voice that was sounding now, all the phrases that she had said earlier. Mr. Cedric said he was worried because the Caleb isn't good enough, and if his brother sees the flaws, he's in big trouble. At that moment, Edwin stood in front of them and held the orb. This was the direct evidence of the teacher's guilt. Gerald was surprised to see the orb. Caleb wouldn't dare show it to others. And in the sphere, the teacher's voice kept saying that a boy should always behave like an adult. She always told him he wasn't a child at all. She didn't like that sort of thing either, but it was all for the future. Caleb confessed that at first he had really listened to his etiquette teacher. But when Aaliyah said it was weird, he didn't even believe it right away. Even though he liked Aaliyah a lot, his mind kept going back to the smiling face of his teacher, and he repeated it like an incantation. That dweller doesn't beat him every day. If he behaves well, she is good to him. Gerald's words came up to his throat, but the moment Aaliyah hurt herself, the boy suddenly realized that this was not the case, and he had to tell his brother the truth at all costs. And when he came into his brother's study, Cedric was very surprised. A boy and nothing. He didn't dare say anything, but he just had to tell his brother everything. He assured himself that he should say, "We have a garden," either as if his teacher had hugged him and said that Mr. Cedric would be disappointed. And the boy wondered again. What if his brother hates you even more when Aaliyah leaves the duchy? The boy was truly afraid. He stood in front of his brother wanting to say something to him, but not. At that moment, his brother came over to him and sat on his knee. He wrapped him in a blanket and hugged him. His brother asked if he was all right. The boy had not expected such behavior from his brother. Cedric said it was chilly in the study, and he noticed his brother shivering. Cedric at this point asked Edwin to bring 10 more blankets, and that for a Caliber was very startling. At that moment he felt very warm as he'd ever felt at Ellie's house. How could he forget that? How could he forget that his brother cared about him? I mean, he knew about it, and that's when he started talking. He told his brother about something he had to say. Caleb now knew for sure that his brother loved him and would never be disappointed in him. He felt like he was in Aaliyah's home in the duchy now. No matter how he behaves or how he learns, their feelings were mutual. The brothers loved each other. They just didn't know how to express their emotions before. At this point, Calibi decided to stop watching the video. At that moment, Aaliyah stood behind the cripple and put her arm around his shoulders. She asked the boy if he was all right. Polyp looked at Aaliyah. He felt very warm and cozy at that moment. Aaliyah's arms were hugging his neck. He said he was all right, and now they would be fine. The three of them stood in the room. They acted as if they were one close-knit family. At this point, Gerald was just emanating anger. She interrupted them again, asked if they were going to kick her out. The girl reminded me once again that she was from the family of the Marquis of Babylon, and she must not be treated like that under any circumstances. Doesn't Mr. Cedric know that? Aaliyah grimaced again. She realized that the girl would not yield and was going all the way. Cedric only hacked away. Sparkles began to glow in his hand. He said she should be grateful now that he was just standing still. At that time, Calibi took his brother's hand, and he called him brother. Cedric looked at his brother carefully. He was simply stunned. Caleb said he told him, "It's going to be really okay now." All the shore could not believe his ears and looked at his brother intently. At that moment, he closed his eyes. It seemed to him that this was some kind of dream. He had said it right. The teacher was indeed the daughter of the Marquis of Babylon, and the Marquis of Reynald is a vassal of the duchy. His reputation speaks for itself. That's the way it was. Cedric asked if Babylon's family shouldn't be an example to the rest of the duchy. Within just 1 month, this incident will be known throughout the Duchy of Ingagentia, as well as the capital. Gerald was stunned. She went back to the gentleman. The man said that it would be decided later whether she would be expelled from the family or not. At this time, the Selig turned to his assistant Edwin. He said Aaliyah needed to calm down and asked him to escort her outside. The teacher knew if she told the community, It would just bury her family's reputation, and she clenched her fists. Why did it turn out this way? I mean, she didn't do anything wrong. She was trying to be perfect. Everything was right. It was all because of Aaliyah. If she hadn't come into this family, everything would have gone according to plan. If it wasn't for that homeless girl. Shedrick said it was time to go, and all three of them started to leave. Ellie exhaled a sigh of relief. It's finally over. The girl remembered the look in her teacher's eyes. She had that look like it was all because of her. She did really well. At that moment, Cedric called out to Ella. He thanked her for that, or as if she didn't realize what she was being thanked for. Everyone said that if it wasn't for her, he would have continued to suffer from the teacher's violence. Now, thanks to Aaliyah, he was able to make sense of it all. Aaliyah smiled happily as always. She said that she had done absolutely nothing. Yes, she had tried to do something, but it was Cedric and Khalib who had sorted everything out. Fisovic said that's absolutely not true. If it wasn't for Aaliyah, they probably wouldn't have become friends with their brother. He would just continue to live in ignorance. Khaliba didn't dare tell his brother everything, and Cedric once again thanked Aaliyah for everything. At that moment, Cedric took his brother's hand, and that's when Aaliyah realized that they had managed to have a quiet conversation after all. It was wonderful. Cedric said that he now wanted to apologize for being rude, or I was stunned. Did he mean the moment when he put his arm around her shoulders? But at that moment, he decided he had to show how important she was to him, so that the vassals, bribed by the Marquis of Babylon, wouldn't dare mess with her. And perhaps it was all because of his behavior. Cedric knew any physical contact would only be made after consent. The girl said okay, and she replied how calculating Cedric was after all. Khalib stood and looked at Aaliyah carefully. He continued to hold his brother's hand. At this time, Caliban laughed out loud, or I habitually stroked his hair and called him cute. She was just happy he believed her word. Now no villain could stop her from becoming Archduke Caliban. The girl stroked his hair once more and told him to keep just smiling like that. It suited him very well. Aaliyah wondered. If she could get her memories back, everything would come back in order. Now Cedric just needs to go back to the study. He asked Aaliyah to get a good night's rest today. The girl thanked Cedric. At that moment, their eyes met, and there was a pause that wasn't mine. Everyone once again asked, please forgive his rudeness. At that moment, he took a lock of her hair in his hand. He looked at him carefully and leaned in. Aaliyah watched Cedric's behavior carefully. He gently brought the bow to his lips and kissed it. The girl was stunned. She had not expected such behavior from the Duke. The girl looked questioningly into Cedric's eyes. He apologized once more. He just wanted to check something. Cedric asked if Aaliyah wore perfume. The girl was embarrassed. No, she didn't buy anything like that. Why? She couldn't understand anything, but Cedric understood everything. At this time, Calibi came up to them and took Aaliyah's hair. He looked at his brother carefully. Aaliyah looked fondly at Callie and called him sweetie once more. Every time the girl looked at Khaliba, he always reminded her of her brother Yun. When she rushed to the hospital to see her brother, she used deodorant and got a little on her hair. At first, she didn't realize what it was, and her brother always felt it and said that his sister smelled different. But the girl laughed a lot when she heard the nurse's words. Let it go on like this. The girl hoped very much that everything would be quiet. She suggested that the three of them have dinner. Caleb didn't mind. Cedric didn't mind. A carriage pulled by 2 horses was traveling through the forest. It was Gerald leaving the palace and biting her nails. She couldn't believe she was leaving the duchy. This can't be happening. What the hell is going on? Does everyone want to say they love each other? But Cedric couldn't fall in love with a commoner. And if Gerald does get kicked out of the family? And she clutched her dress with strength. It was all that girl Aaliyah's fault. We must think of something. It's all because of her. All the teacher's troubles only happened after she showed up. Before that, everything was perfect and going according to plan. It's all because of this homeless girl. After Gerald's return, a council was convened to discuss the banishment of the Marquis Reynold of Babylon. Families bribed by the Marquis opposed the banishment. The sins of the Marquis's daughter are very great, but this does not diminish her contribution to the development of the duchy. The families were asked not to jump to conclusions. Those who were oppressed by the Marquis of Babylon did not miss their chance. Everyone knew that this incident amounted to a change. The Marquis must know about his daughter's affairs. Lord Cedric must banish him. It was just a disgusting sight. Orthodoxy pointing fingers at each other and shouting. It was a good thing Cedric listened to Aaliyah this time and didn't bring Khalib with him. He shouldn't have had to hear that. Cedric knew that it was impossible to completely get rid of the Babylon family's influence in an instant, but it is possible to reduce it in this way. And the Duke thought for a moment. This is the way to make sure it doesn't happen again. The events took place at the Marquis's house. Marquis's wife asked how things were going. You were sitting in the armchair and were very upset. He said that above all he had avoided banishment, and the wife breathed a sigh of relief. The biggest problem had been solved. Given the situation, it would be better to express gratitude first, then lie low. The Marquis couldn't let it go. We must be sure to appeal to shorten the publicity of the case. After all, they're the Archduchess's uneven kin, and if they try to expel the Marquis's family, they'll have to patronize them. The Marquis was sure they would be sure to consider his appeal. Marquis was dumbfounded. He couldn't believe that Cedric had sent the letter back. What was the meaning of all this? The counselor said that he didn't even bother to open it when he saw the seal. The Marquis asked the counselor again what he had just said. The Marquis was upset. Could this brat have done this to the Marquis? What right does he have to reject his appeal without even reading it? He's the head of the family on his mother's side. The counselor told the Marquis that there was a message from the duchy. It was useless to read the letter. It would therefore be requested that the term be shortened to 15 days. It would be great if they used this time to think about the stoppers, and let them be grateful that the Serbians didn't extend the deadline. The Duke asked me to tell you that their family is forbidden to leave the estate for a week. If they did as he said, the publicity period would remain unchanged. The Marquis quickly crumpled up the piece of paper.